Chapter 504. After getting Qin Shi and Qin Xuecheng's approval, Cheng Hua and Yizhi could finally leave this planet that made them feel sad at this moment. Although Qin Shi did not leave any restrictions on them, the two of them were tactful, so they did not even think of using this opportunity to escape from Qin Xuecheng's evil clutches. The two of them seemed to have already accepted their fate. Even Cheng Hua, who had always had a fiery temper, did not have any intention of encouraging Yizhi to escape after regaining control of the cloud-piercing shuttle at this moment. Instead, he looked back at the azure planet with some reluctance. As expected of a great figure in the supreme realm. Such breadth of mind and boldness, you are really a role model for our generation. Yizhi did not notice the strange look on Cheng Hua's face. Perhaps to relieve the depressing atmosphere on the ship, Yizhi stood at the stern of the ship and sighed with emotion. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he could not help but tease with a smile. Cheng Hua, let's hide in the heavenly market enclosure, shall we? Cheng Hua did not reply. Seeing this, Yizhi was like a demon tempting people to fall into depravity. He moved closer to Cheng Hua and continued to bewitch him. How about the purple myrtle enclosure? The three enclosures are like three wooden rafts floating in the vast void. Although their whereabouts are uncertain and difficult to find, they converge once every 100 years. I heard my father mention it before we set off. The next time the three enclosures converge should be within the next 10 years. You see, when the time comes, we only need to hide in the heavenly market enclosure or the purple myrtle enclosure. So what if Mr. Qin is a supreme realm cultivator? Could it be that he can turn the three enclosures upside down and be determined to find us? Yizhi kept bewitching Cheng Hua. If it was the old Cheng Hua, he might have been persuaded by him and jumped up to hide in the heavenly market enclosure. But unfortunately, after experiencing Qin Xuecheng's constant hardships, Cheng Hua's temperament had been restrained a lot. Therefore, after hearing Yizhi's incessant chatter, Cheng Hua immediately slapped him in annoyance, and then scolded him with a smile on his face. Do you really take me for a fool? If you want to go, then go. What's the use of telling me this? I'm the one who swore to Mr. Qin, not you. What are you afraid of? After hearing Cheng Hua say this, Yizhi immediately felt relieved. The reason why he tried to bewitch Cheng Hua was because he was afraid that Cheng Hua would act without thinking like before. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Yizhi was very pleased with Cheng Hua's change, so he sat next to him with a smile, and then chatted with him casually. Cheng Hua, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think it's actually pretty good for us to stay here. Although we're controlled by others and are punched and kicked by that evil woman every day like a slave. But if we think about it from another perspective, the two of us seem to have learned a lot from it. What's more, Mr. Qin is still in the supreme stage. Even if it's just a simple sentence or two, it will be of great benefit to our future cultivation, so... At this point, Yizhi deliberately paused and then said with a determined face, after 7 days I will definitely be back here. After hearing Yizhi's words, Cheng Hua seemed to be a little dispirited and didn't seem to be interested in paying attention to him at all. Yizhi felt that Cheng Hua's behavior was a little strange today, so he couldn't help but push him and then asked with a puzzled face, What's wrong with you? Aren't you happy to be home? Hearing this, Cheng Hua shook his head and then muttered in a very strange tone, Don't mess around, I'm thinking about a very serious problem. What problem? I'm thinking about whether Nian will like the taste of the dragon saliva fruit. You see, it's rare for the two of us to go home. We should take this opportunity to bring some gifts back for Nian, right? But I thought about it and I didn't think of what to bring her. Think about it yourself, what does Nian usually treat us to? Chocolate, biscuits, jelly, French fries, yogurt, these are all delicacies in the world. As a return gift we can't take out something too shabby, right? After hearing Cheng Hua say this, Yizhi couldn't help but be stunned. Oh right. I actually forgot such an important thing. Come, let's quickly think about what gifts we should bring for Nian. Time flew like an arrow and the sun and moon flew like a shuttle. In the blink of an eye. A month's time passed. During this time the adults were busy cultivating in seclusion all day long, and because the little girl skipped a grade she needed to spend more time reviewing her homework every day. Everyone was busy with their own things and the courtyard was much quieter because of this. As time passed, although Qin Xuecheng didn't have any clear expression, the expression on her face was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. They clearly agreed on 7 days and a month had already passed, but Changhua and Yiji still hadn't returned to Earth. Were these two brats playing with her like a monkey? As soon as she thought of this problem, Qin Xueqing's towering chest couldn't help but begin to rise and fall rapidly. After enduring for a full month, she couldn't bear it anymore. Therefore, Qin Xueqing found Xianxia and wanted to borrow a Xianxia from him. "Do you still have a Xianxia? Lend it to me." Hearing this, Xianxia raised his eyebrows and asked, "What do you want to do?" "Find someone. I want to see, can they hide to the ends of the earth?" Seeing Qin Xueqing gnashing her teeth in anger, Xianxia suddenly laughed. "I think they might be delayed by something. Don't worry, it's only been a month. Wait a little longer, there's no rush. How about this, if they don't come back by next month? I'll find time to go to Supreme Palace enclosure again and I'll definitely catch the two of them for you, okay?" After hearing Xianxia's promise, Qin Xueqing finally withdrew the idea of going to Supreme Palace enclosure. Then, like an inflated blowfish, she angrily returned to the East Wing room. It couldn't be helped, his sister-in-law's temper was just that bad. If Xianxia really gave her a Xianxia, she would probably immediately go to Supreme Palace enclosure to find Changhua and Yiji to reason with them. His sister-in-law was furious, but Xianxia didn't seem to care too much. This was because he believed that Changhua and Yiji would never dare to trick him. After all, the name Mr. Qin. Now, even if it was at Supreme Palace enclosure, it could be considered a golden signboard. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 505. Xianxia was certain that Changhua and Yiji would come back, so he didn't take this matter to heart for the time being. Next, let's talk about the little girl first. After a month of adaptation, the little girl had successfully integrated into the new class. Although she was a year younger than her classmates, they didn't dare to look down on her. On one hand, it was because Nianyan's usual performance was very good, so the teachers liked her very much. On the other hand, it was entirely because of her results in this monthly exam. In Wuxia's education system, academic results were the only standard to measure a child's quality. Although the little girl skipped a grade, her results in this monthly exam still easily took first place in her grade. Therefore, when the teacher announced the results, the whole class was shocked. Wasn't this the other family's child that parents often talked about? The teacher also said before that after the monthly exam, the class monitor would be selected based on everyone's performance. And in this so-called comprehensive performance, wasn't the exam results the most important indicator? The teachers didn't like children who were unreasonable. Those children who were obedient and sensible, but their grades weren't good enough to convince the masses. Nianyan's performance and results were very good. Plus she was the class monitor in the first grade class. So what reason did the teacher have to not let her be the class monitor? Outstanding children would always be singled out as an example. Therefore, this little girl who had just skipped a grade and entered the third grade, after a monthly exam her name had already spread throughout the entire grade. On this day, as usual, after the little girl waved goodbye to Xianxia, she quickly walked to the classroom and prepared to organize everyone to start the morning reading as the class monitor. This was the first task she received after becoming the class monitor, so she was especially attentive to it. As soon as she sat down, she couldn't wait to take out the language textbook from her bag and neatly placed it on the table. It wasn't time for class yet, so only half of the students were there, but the classroom was especially lively. Nianyan looked back and saw that the most mischievous children in the class were chasing each other with brooms. Therefore, she immediately shouted to stop them. "Quiet. Class is about to begin." It was the class monitor's responsibility to maintain discipline. Now that she had become the class monitor, she naturally had to take on this responsibility. Following her outburst, the classroom suddenly became much quieter. Seeing this, the children who were chasing each other stopped and quickly returned to their seats. They were not afraid of Nianyan, but they were afraid that Nianyan would tell on them to the teacher. Nowadays, a class leader who doesn't snitch, is that still the class leader? If Nianyan's prestige in Year 1 Class 2 was earned through her fists, then her prestige in Year 3 Class 2 was earned through her own outstanding performance. It was the third year. No matter how late a child matured, he should be more sensible by now. Teacher Zhang stepped into the classroom just as the bell rang. Looking at the silent classroom, Teacher Zhang couldn't help but nod his head in satisfaction. Then he gestured for Nianyan to come to the podium and lead everyone to start the morning reading. The text for today's morning reading was Zhao Zhou Brage. It was a simplified version with pinyin annotations. The whole text was less than 500 words. After Nian led the students to read the text twice, the teacher nodded his head in satisfaction and officially began the day's lesson. There were a total of 46 students in their class. It wasn't a large number, so the desks and chairs were all a single set and not a two-person set. After Nian returned to her seat, she took out the textbooks and put them in her drawer as usual. At this moment, she suddenly realized, he didn't know when this strange thing appeared in his drawer. Nian took out the thing and saw that it was a letter folded into the shape of a heart. The style of the letter was very exquisite, and it even had a faint fragrance. It was obvious that this was the most popular letter paper in the school's canteen. There was a name written on the heart-shaped letter. It was Qin Yan. Nian frowned and opened it. The first thing she saw was a few lines of crooked worm-like love messages. To Qin Yan, I like you. My love for you is very deep as a bottomless pit. I don't look good, but I'm a good person. I'll give you a gift right away. Can you tell me your QQ? And where is your home? My body won't go with you, but my heart will go anywhere with you. Moi heart, 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 heart. Of course, this was the translated version. There were many wrong words in the original text. The child who wrote this didn't seem to know how to write love. After writing it wrong several times, he directly drew a lot of hearts on it. This was a love letter. Nian expressionlessly read the contents of the letter. Then, as if nothing had happened, she directly tore the letter that carried the strong love of others into pieces. No one, including the teacher, noticed anything strange about her. She was silent like this, as if she suddenly had something on her mind. In fact, Nian already knew what a love letter was and what it meant. But she never thought that one day she would also be the one to receive a love letter. Then there was a problem. When faced with such a situation, what should she do? Should she tell the teacher or should she tell her father? It was probably because the writer had forgotten to sign the letter, so she didn't even know who wrote this strange love letter. What should she do? What should she do? The little girl had something on her mind, so she was obviously a little muddle-headed for the rest of the day. Finally, the crisp and melodious school bell rang. After the teacher assigned the homework for the day, the little girl uncharacteristically rushed out of the classroom with her bag. She ran as fast as she could. Soon she ran to the school gate. Then through the school gate she saw her father standing in the crowd and waving at her. Unlike the teacher, Xianxia almost instantly noticed the strangeness on the little girl's face. So he immediately walked out of the crowd and squatted on the ground, smiling and motioning her to come out. Dad! As if she had suffered a great grievance, the little girl ran out of the school gate and threw herself into Xianxia's arms. Seeing this, Xianxia's eyebrows suddenly twisted. Nian, what's wrong? Were you bullied at school? Don't be afraid, tell Dad what happened, Dad will help you. When I was writing, I suddenly thought of a song. Let me recommend Love Letter by Jackie Chungo. Unfortunately, love is not a few drops of tears or a few love letters. This may be a little cruel to people who wait for others to give them happiness, often don't live happily. Chapter 506. Looking at his daughter's depressed look, Xianxia's heart suddenly clenched. After he walked out of the crowd with the little girl, he immediately squatted on the ground, then hugged her and asked patiently, Nian, what's wrong? Did someone bully you? Although the little girl's face had a somewhat aggrieved expression, it did not look like she was bullied. Moreover, with her current physical condition, if she was really angry and went berserk, there would be no problem for her to beat up children of the same age. Therefore, the first thought that came to Xianxia's mind was actually, Nian was ostracized by her classmates? After all, she was a child who skipped a grade. It was normal for her to not be able to integrate into the new group in a short period of time. Xianxia had already mentally prepared himself for this, so he immediately began to think about how he could enlighten the little girl. A person's life was a process of constant adaptation. If she wanted to shrink back because she could not adapt to skipping a grade, how could Nian smoothly adapt to other environments in the future? He had to persuade her properly. But on second thought, Xianxia had an idea in his mind. But at this moment, the little girl suddenly said timidly, Daddy, someone wrote me a letter. Ah? A letter? What letter? Suddenly hearing Nian's words, Xianxia's train of thought was suddenly disrupted. A letter? What did she mean? He did not react at all. The father and daughter stood by the street, staring at each other blankly. In an instant, Qianxia only felt a flash of lightning in his mind, and almost instantly he vaguely understood the meaning of the little girl's words. So he immediately squeezed out a smile, then pretended to be relaxed and asked, "Nian, who wrote you a letter? Can you show it to Daddy?" As soon as his voice fell, Qianxia pretended to look at the little girl with a face full of anticipation. However, what he did not expect was the little girl, who had always been obedient to him, this time after hearing his words, shook her head at him for the first time. "It's over." Seeing the little fellow's performance, Qianxia's heart sank. She thought about how the cabbage she had painstakingly planted had been eaten by the pig next door before it was time for it to bloom and bear fruit. At that moment, Qianxia even had the urge to kill. It must be those bad kids who bullied Nian for her ignorance. Otherwise, how could a child like her understand such things? Lousy school. I will tear it down tomorrow. As a kind and open-minded father, Qianxia firmly believed that his daughter could still be saved. Therefore he immediately tossed those inexplicable guesses to the back of his mind and exhaled deeply. Then he put on an extremely solemn expression. No matter what, he had to make the little guy realize the seriousness of this problem today. However, just as Qianxia was about to reprimand her, the little girl seemed to have suddenly thought of something and replied calmly, "I tore up the letter." Torn? Qianxia was stunned. Then he took the little girl into his arms and laughed excitedly. "My youngest daughter is sensible. Well done. Well done." He had long heard that children nowadays were very mature. But he also did not expect to think that children nowadays would mature to such an extent. Nian was only a little over 7 years old. Although she had skipped a grade and her classmates were generally 1 or 2 years older than her, they were still only 8 or 9 years old children. "Don't you want to watch cartoons anymore? Not playing Mobile Legends?" Actually had the leisure to come and flirt with his daughter. Fortunately, Nian did not let him down. If it were not for the many parents at the school gate, Qianxia was afraid that he would be so excited that he would shout to the sky, "Well done." Qianxia was very satisfied with the little fellow's way of dealing with it. But on second thought he could not help but feel a little worried. After all, the problem of puppy love was more serious than being unable to adapt to skipping a grade. Looking at the cute little girl in front of him, Qianxia could not help but feel a little lost. How should he put it? In Qianxia's eyes, Nian was simply a child who did not even show any gender characteristics. Children were children. Children were not differentiated by gender. But now, someone had actually started to write a love letter to Nian. Although Nian tore the letter, this could only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. In fact, Qianxia was very clear in his heart. As the child continued to grow up, Nian's charm would only increase. Just like Ying in the past, the grown-up Nian only needed to stand there and it should be enough to attract the attention of all the opposite sex nearby. Now that the first love letter had appeared, there would definitely be a second one, a third one, and even countless of them. Then there was a problem. As a parent, what should he do? Even when he was besieged by the 4 immortals, Qianxia was not so nervous. He frowned tightly and kept telling himself not to think too much, but he still could not help but think of the worst. Some things, the more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Qianxia frowned and didn't say anything. The little girl waited for a long time. After seeing that her father was still frowning, she tilted her head slightly and pondered. She was a very smart child and naturally knew what her father was worried about. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, Nian took the initiative to hug Qianxia's neck and said softly, "Dad, don't worry, I won't fall in love at a young age." Qianxia subconsciously swallowed her saliva. He was still hesitating on how to bring it up, but he did not expect the little girl to take the initiative to mention this issue. A child who was just over 7 years old actually discussed the topic of puppy love with her parents. Such a scene, just thinking about it, would feel a little awkward and strange. "Nian, do you know what puppy love means?" "I know there used to be a lot of people in our class who fell in love at a young age, but I didn't tell the teacher." "Really?" Qianxia was shocked. Obviously, the class that the little girl mentioned was the first-year second class. A first-year child learned how to fall in love. What was going on with this world? It had to be said that Qianxia's worldview was greatly impacted. But on second thought he was a little relieved. The situation should not be as serious as he thought. After all, the information on the internet was too advanced now. The amount of information that children could obtain was far more than children in the 80s and 90s. Naturally, they would know more than children in the 80s and 90s. Falling in love was a popular word at the moment. Children were very curious, so naturally they would learn this slightly novel way of getting along with each other from various channels. Coupled with the special nature of the school environment, it was not surprising that there were many young couples in a class under the vicious influence of spreading rumors. Chapter 507. Nian if. At this point Xianxia could not help but pause. After hesitating for a moment he nervously probed, if you have someone you like in the future, you know what it means to like, right? It means that you really want to play with someone every day and that person also likes to play with you. Will you fall in love early like other students? For parents this question was indeed a bit awkward. Children were not sensible. Their understanding of early love was naturally very different from the understanding of early love of adults. In fact, for children under the 4th grade to fall in love early at most, it was a hazy good feeling. And this kind of good feeling was very easy to change. The child today liked A, tomorrow it might be B, and the day after tomorrow it might suddenly like C who got first place in class. If A, B, and C were seen as toys, it was naturally easy to understand this problem. Children were both curious and liked to explore at the same time. Therefore, when encountering this kind of thing, it was best for parents not to be too agitated to the extent of going overboard. Correct guidance was the best way to solve the problem. As the saying goes, it is better to let go than to block. Xianxia tried to use a hypothetical method to let the little girl understand the disadvantages of early love. But what he did not expect was, as soon as he said his hypothesis, the little girl directly shook her head and then replied with a firm expression, no. I won't like anyone and I won't fall in love with anyone. Hearing this, Xianxia could not help but ask, are you so sure? Why? Because they are too stupid. I don't like to play with them. Looking at the little girl's expression of disdain, Xianxia suddenly understood. So, she thought that her classmates were too stupid so no one could enter her eyes at all? Although Wenwen and Mingming are also very stupid, but they have always been my best friends so I don't dislike them. Also, I know what it means to like. If puppy love means two people are together all day long, then if I play with Wenwen and Mingming every day, isn't that also early love? We're not dating. We're good friends. So, Dad, your example is wrong. After hearing his daughter's reasonable rebuttal, Xianxia couldn't help but be speechless. But on second thought it was as if he had heard something happy. After laughing and shaking his head, he stretched out his neck and kissed the little fellow's face heavily. Muah. The little fellow was preoccupied with expressing her views on puppy love. Suddenly she was ambushed by Xianxia and immediately forgot what she was going to say next. Daddy, you're so annoying. After saying that, the little thing buried its head in Xianxia's shoulder, seemingly a little shy. Silly child, are you shy now? After today's conversation, Xianxia finally realized, Nian was really starting to grow up. Time is always relative. Now let's rewind time to 1 month ago. After a period of hurrying, Changhua and Yiji successfully arrived at the Supreme Palace enclosure on the 3rd day after they set off. Xianxia didn't have the habit of showing off in front of children, so the two of them didn't know that Xianxia had caused a ruckus in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. They also didn't know that the Tuoba family had suffered heavy losses because of it. As the instigators of all this, the two brats only had the chance to visit home after leaving home for almost a year. Thus, just as the cloud-piercing shuttle flew into the sky above Ning province, Yiji couldn't contain his excitement anymore. He jumped off the cloud-piercing shuttle and flew as fast as he could to the Dongfang family. He had already discussed with Changhua beforehand. Everyone would go back to their own families and find their mothers. 3 days later they would meet here and head back to Earth together. The 3 great families of Ning province were the Xianyuan family, the Dongfang family, and the Tuoba family. In terms of status, the two of them actually had very high positions in their families. But it was also because of this that the pressure they faced far exceeded that of their peers. Changhua could be used as an example. His father was Genrio, one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. Since he was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family, Genrio's cultivation naturally wouldn't be weak. In reality, Genrio, who was in the early stage of soul formation, was already more than 800 years old. Immortal cultivators had long lifespans, but when it came to bearing children, they were far inferior to mortals. As the saying goes, the unseen world has its own will. Under the influence of the laws of heaven and earth, the higher one's cultivation, the lower their chances of bearing children. Genrio had 9 sons and 4 daughters in his life. Cheng-Hua was Genrio's youngest child and at the same time his last child. Cheng-Hua's talent wasn't bad. In addition, Genrio had a child at an old age, so it was inevitable that he would especially spoil this youngest child. Logically speaking, Cheng-Hua should have lived a very comfortable life since he was born in one of the 3 great families of Ning province and his father was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. After all, he was a rich second generation. But it was a pity. Reality was always slightly different from what outsiders imagined. In reality, Cheng-Hua's life wasn't good at all. Cheng-Hua's mother was called Zhang and she came from a small family in Ning province. Because of her outstanding appearance, Genrio made an exception and took her in as a concubine. What needed to be understood here was how long a cultivator's life was. If one didn't have someone to accompany them on the long road, wouldn't their life be very lonely? Because of this, cultivators usually viewed status as extremely important. Even though Xianyuan Yuanliang had countless women, other than his first wife, First Madam, the only one who had a proper status with him was the second Madam, Madam Zhang. From this, it could be seen that Zhang was definitely not someone to be trifled with. However, although Zhang's methods were powerful, she was still a woman, so there were many things that Zhang couldn't decide. For example, Cheng-Hua's eldest brother always used the excuse of training as an excuse to often throw Cheng-Hua into an extremely dangerous place, and left him to fend for himself there. And this was the fundamental reason why Cheng-Hua dared to recklessly enter the Tianshu ruins later on. As a mother, Zhang saw everything, but she couldn't think of any way to help her son, who asked Cheng-Hua to only have one big brother left. Both of them were flesh and blood. In addition, his eldest brother always had a reasonable explanation, so Genrio wouldn't help his youngest son at all. Instead, he would think that his eldest son did the right thing. No matter how noble their birth was, cultivators would face all kinds of unexpected difficulties and crises in their lives. If they could make it through, it would be an opportunity. If they couldn't make it through, it would be fate. Everyone was already used to this. Cheng-Hua should have had many brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, most of his brothers and sisters had fallen. Now only the powerful 5th brother and 8th sister, who had already married into the Dongfang family, were left. Genrio didn't want to be sad, so from the day Cheng-Hua was born, his 5th brother became the eldest brother, and his 8th sister became the second sister. Under normal circumstances, siblings should help each other and complement each other. Cheng-Hua's family was an exception. If one had to use a word to describe the relationship between the 2 brothers, then this word must be, like strangers. Chapter 508. Cheng-Hua's eldest brother was Genyuan Jingqi, who was over 300 years old this year. Ever since he broke through to Yuanying, Genyuan Jingqi had been given a position in the family as a steward. He was considered to have officially stepped into the core management of the Xianyuan family. It was important to note that any child with the blood of one of the 3 major families in their veins, regardless of whether they were from the main family or the side family, had to work hard to gain the family's approval. For anyone in the family, status had to be fought for. Since Genyuan Jingqi was able to step into Yuanying at the age of 300 at this rate, as long as nothing too big happened in the future, he would definitely have the opportunity to successfully inherit Genrio's legacy and become one of the 8 elders. What were the 8 elders? They were second only to one person and above everyone else. Seeing that his eldest son was so promising, Genrio naturally hoped that his youngest son could be as outstanding as his eldest son. Thus, after Cheng-Hua was born, Genrio handed over the task of educating him to Genyuan Jingqi. And this was the beginning of Cheng-Hua's tragedy. Genyuan Jingqi didn't seem to like this little brother of his. After all, they weren't born from the same mother. When Cheng-Hua was still an infant, Genyuan Jingqi used the excuse of cleansing his meridians to soak Cheng-Hua in all sorts of strange potions. He even called it a medicinal bath. Zhang had secretly investigated this so-called medicinal bath. Based on the dregs of the medicine left behind, she could roughly confirm that the medicine inside was poisonous. Because of this, Zhang didn't hesitate to have a big argument with Genyuan Jingqi. She always felt that Cheng-Hua's half-brother had ulterior motives. He might want to murder Cheng-Hua, so she didn't want Genyuan Jingqi to get close to Cheng-Hua. Zhang originally wanted to use this opportunity to completely drive Genyuan Jingqi away from Cheng-Hua. Who would have thought that when Genrio heard about this, he would only ask Genyuan Jingqi to show her the ancient book that recorded the formula of the medicinal bath, and then mercilessly scolded her. This ancient book was painstakingly obtained by Jingqi from the Jade Clear Cave Heaven. I have already checked it beforehand. The herbs used in the book seem to be poisonous, but in fact the principle of using poison to fight poison is used. Therefore the effect of the medicine is better than ordinary herbs. Jingqi is my child and so is Changhua. Since they are brothers, why would Jingqi hurt Changhua for no reason? I think you are measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Chenghua's talent is slightly better than Jingqi's. If he ends up with nothing in the future, don't blame me for not caring about the relationship between husband and wife. Genrio was one of the 8 elders in the family and also the head of the family. His words naturally carried a lot of weight. After this, Zhang lost the right to raise Changhua. Mother and son could only see each other on certain days. For the rest of the time, Changhua could only bitterly endure all kinds of inhumane torture in Genyuan Jingqi. Of course, Xianyuan Jingqi would never torture Changhua himself. He would only be like a god who was high up in the sky. He would give his younger brother all kinds of death-seeking missions and he would call it training. Fortunately, no matter how difficult these experiences were, Changhua still managed to pull through in the end. As for the love and hate entanglement between Changhua and his older brother, I won't go into too much detail here. Let's get back to the main story first. Today was Zhang's birthday, which was also her 100th birthday. 100 years old. No matter how long a cultivator lived, how many hundred years could they live in their lifetime? What's more, for someone like Zhang who wasn't very talented, there was basically no hope of yuanning in this lifetime. If it had been someone else, they would have definitely thrown a big party when their birthday was coming to an end. Genrio originally planned to do this as well. After all, he was one of the 8 elders of the Xianyuan family. Whenever there was a happy occasion in the family, even the head of the family would personally come to congratulate him. But it was a pity. Ever since Zhang found out that Changhua had entered the Tianshu ruins, she shut herself in her room and refused to see anyone. Genrio originally wanted to take advantage of her birthday to comfort her, but he didn't expect that Zhang would mercilessly block him outside the room. Now that Hora's life is uncertain as his mother, I really don't have the leisure to do that. Please don't blame me. Genrio didn't force his way in, nor did he use his divine sense to probe the situation in the room. This was because he heard a trace of despair in Zhang's voice. That's right. Now that Chenghua's life was uncertain, how could Zhang still smile? Ever since the day Qinshi wreaked havoc in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, everyone had a new understanding of the Tianshu ruins. Although the truth wasn't as mysterious as the legends, at least everyone knew that there was at least one supreme being living in there. What's more, this supreme being could even fight the 4 perfected masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven alone. Then with his methods, could it be that he couldn't block the heart flame lamp senses? Therefore, even if Chenghua's heart flame lamp hadn't been extinguished, Genrio found it very hard to believe that Changhua was still alive in this world. Sigh. After a deep sigh, Genrio could only silently turn around and leave. In order to not let anyone disturb Zhang, Genrio didn't forget to remind the servants not to let anyone take half a step into the courtyard after leaving. Now he could only hope that Zhang could walk out of this shadow as soon as possible. After all, Genrio had lived for several hundred years and was already used to seeing life and death. Therefore, when he learned that Changhua might never come back, he didn't appear too sad or emotional. It was impossible to say that he wasn't sad. But what was the use of being sad? As an immortal cultivator, Genrio had experienced too many life and death separations in his life. That old heart of his had long been numb. But it was precisely because his heart had long been numb that Genrio didn't know it all. This woman who had locked herself in her room all day because of the loss of her son, in such a state of despair, what terrible things would she do, in a dim room? Zhang sat quietly by the bed alone, holding an old rag doll in her hand. This rag doll was personally sewn for Changhua. It was also Chenghua's favorite toy when he was young. Perhaps she was thinking of him when she saw it. Zhang gently stroked the rag doll with her fingers as she softly muttered, Don't worry. Mother has already reached an agreement with the Holy Church. Very soon they will let Big Brother accompany you to the Tianshu ruins. Her voice was very soft, but the expression on her face was very strange. Sometimes she chuckled, sometimes she was sad. As if she was possessed, it gave people a horrifying and strange feeling. 9 Heaven's Divine Emperor. Chapter 509. The first madam had passed away many years ago, so apart from Genryo, Zhang had the highest status in the family. However, so what if she had a high status? Genryo still thought that Zhang's cultivation was too low, and that she was not talented enough to guide Chonghua properly. That was why he had left Chonghua in the care of his eldest brother since he was young. But what happened in the end? Now that Chonghua's fate was unknown, Zhang naturally took it to heart. She felt that Chonghua was forced to his death by his eldest brother and father. Her son was forced to his death, so as Chonghua's mother, how could she continue to remain calm? One had to know that when a woman went crazy she would not recognize her own family. To Zhang, although the Xianyuan family was huge, there was nothing in it that she was reluctant to part with. Chonghua's trip to the Tianshu ruins could only end in death. As a result, Madame Zhang's heart was filled with hatred. She hated everyone, including Genryo. Just as she had said before, if something really happened to Chonghua, she would make sure that the entire Xianyuan family was buried with him. The Holy Church had already responded, so Zhang believed that her plan would come to fruition soon. Zhang silently planned. At this moment, a figure completely ignored Genryo's ban and forced his way into her courtyard. Genryo had set up a restriction on the entrance of the courtyard, allowing only people to leave and not enter. Thus, this person could only use all his strength to break through the restriction and try to force his way in. Soon, this commotion alerted the guards in the courtyard. Seeing that the guards were rushing over, the intruder turned around and shouted at them excitedly. "Open the restriction. I want to see my mother." As soon as he appeared, the guards were stunned. He saw that this person was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt on his upper body and a pair of ripped jeans on his lower body. Coupled with his short hair, he looked somewhat out of place with the surrounding environment. His attire was a little strange. After careful observation, the guards finally dared to confirm that the person in front of them was the long-missing second young master. Second young master really came back. What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Seeing that everyone was hesitating, Chonghua no longer bothered with them. He looked around and found that the secret key to open the restriction was on one of the guards' waist. He walked over to the person and snatched the key. The guard instinctively wanted to stop him, but he was instantly intimidated by his fierce glare. How could this person not be the second young master? Seeing Chonghua swagger into the courtyard, the guard in charge of keeping the secret key seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but shiver, and then with a face full of excitement he shouted, "Quick, report to the master. Second young master is back." Chonghua's return was like a stone heavily smashed into the water. As the restriction was opened, Zhang finally heard the commotion outside. She frowned and opened the door. Just as she was about to scold him, she unexpectedly saw the figure that made her worried the moment she raised her head. "Mother, I'm back." When Chonghua saw that Zhang had come out, he immediately knelt on the ground and bowed. At that moment, Zhang felt as if she was struck by lightning. She had an expression of disbelief on her face as she stood there in a daze for a full 3 seconds. Then she subconsciously cried out in shock, "What? Mother, it's me. I'm back. It's really you. Come here quickly, let mother take a good look at you." The scene of mother and son reuniting after such a long time was really touching. Zhang quickly walked forward and helped Chonghua up. Then the mother and son hugged each other tightly. They were so emotional that they couldn't speak. After a long while, Zhang finally suppressed the excitement in her heart. Then with a concerned expression she asked, "Fortunately, the Immortal Emperor protected me. I didn't have to send off my son just now." After experiencing so many things on Earth, Chonghua had matured a lot. He had learned many things from Qinshi, including kinship. How could Zhang not treat him as well as how Qinshi treated Nian? How great and selfless was this kind of love? Every time he thought of this, Chonghua couldn't wait to rush back to the Supreme Palace enclosure. He only hoped that he could use his filial piety to comfort his mother's silent concern for him all these years. As the saying goes, a tree wants to be still but the wind won't stop. A child wants to be raised but his parents won't wait. Now he was finally back. "I'm unfilial and made mother worry." It's fine. It's good that you're back. Zhang looked at Chonghua up and down. After making sure that he was not hurt, she asked happily, didn't you go to the Tianshu ruins? This. Chonghua naturally understood what Zhang was worried about. So he immediately smiled and replied, Mother, I came back especially to celebrate your birthday. Zhang seemed to want to say something else. Seeing this, Chonghua directly held her arm and said with a smile, Let's go. I'll help you back to the house first. Then I'll tell you what happened in detail. The mother and son returned to the room. Then, under Zhang's incredulous gaze, Chonghua recounted his experience during this period of time in detail. You mean, after you met Mr. Chen, not only did he not kill you, and he even took the initiative to accept you as his disciple? After listening to Chonghua's story, the expression on Zhang's face was very interesting. Mr. Chen's prestige was now a gold-plated signboard in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Everyone said that the Tianshu ruins were a forbidden area and that trespassers would die. Who would have thought that Chonghua not only did not lose his life after trespassing into the Tianshu ruins, but also profited from the disaster and formed a good relationship with Mr. Chen. Mother, you might not understand. Mr. Chen did not accept me as his disciple. He only let me live in his house. When he was free, he would give me a few pointers. In order not to worry his mother, Chonghua concealed most of the facts. He did not mention Qin Xuecheng at all, so Zhang mistakenly thought that he had been accepted as a disciple by Qin Shi. Even if it was only a few pointers, it was still pointers from Jizun. Mr. Qin is a peerless master who can defeat the 4 perfected masters alone. You've bumped into a great opportunity. Zhang was very excited. Who knew what kind of great luck Chonghua had had to be lucky enough to become Jizun's disciple? Looking at her son who was becoming more mature and steady, Zhang could not help but smile from the bottom of her heart. But immediately after, she seemed to have suddenly thought of something terrible, and a trace of worry flashed across her eyes. Chonghua's return was indeed a great thing. But what should she do with the Holy Church? Unilaterally break the contract? Would she dare? Thinking of this, Zhang's heart could not help but sink, and she instantly became a little worried. Chonghua was immersed in the joy of reuniting with his mother, so he did not notice the strange look on Zhang's face. He thought that Zhang was blaming him for trespassing on the Tianshu ruins, so he was thinking of something to say to make his mother happy. But at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the courtyard. A large group of people was seen hurrying towards Zhang's room. The leader was Genrio. Other than Chonghua's elder brother, Genyuan Jingqi, who was with him, there was also the current head of the Xianyuan family, Xianyuan Wang. Chapter 5:10. Outside the courtyard, the head of the family and the 8 elders arrived together. From this, it could be seen how shocking the news of Chonghua coming back alive from the Tianshu ruins was. Where is he? Xianyuan Wang looked to be about 60 years old. He was wearing an exquisite dark green robe with a simple jade pendant hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was the one with the highest status in the group. This was Genrio's courtyard. Although Xianyuan Wang was the head of the family, the servants did not recognize him. After all, there was no television in the Supreme Palace enclosure. The guard didn't know Xianyuan Wang, but he vaguely recognized a few of the 8 elders. Therefore, when he heard Xianyuan Wang's seemingly random question, the guard was stunned. He didn't know how to answer at all. Seeing this, Genrio immediately walked out from the back of the group and quickly scolded in a low voice. Fool, the head of the family is asking you a question. Why aren't you answering? Where did Chonghua go? After hearing the head of the family scolding, the guard replied with a look of realization. Master, the second young master has been staying in the second madam's room ever since he came back. He did not go anywhere. All right, get out of here. The Xianyuan family was very large. If one had to describe it, the Xianyuan family could be considered a county. The head of the family was the county head, and the 8 elders were the mayors of the various towns. Now that the county head was here, it was understandable that the servants were slightly negligent. Although Genrio was very impressive all day in front of the head of the family, he was very much like a bootlicker who only knew how to nod his head and bow his head. And this was the specialty of the Supreme Palace enclosure. That was the feudal hierarchy. Under the rules of this system, the head of the family's authority could not be challenged. Fortunately, Xianyuan Wang seemed to be in a good mood today. Therefore, after hearing the guard's answer, Xianyuan Wuang did not show any intention of blaming him. After casually waving his hand, he strode into the courtyard. When his entourage saw this, they all followed behind him and swarmed into the courtyard like a swarm of bees. At this time, Changhua also heard the commotion outside the house. After signaling his mother not to get up, he walked to the door and pushed it open. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on him. This was Genrio's youngest son, Xianyuan Changhua, a little brat who hadn't even had a coronation ceremony. If not for the fact that Changhua had returned alive from the Tianshu ruins, most of the people present would have forgotten that Genrio had such an outstanding son. Why aren't you kneeling down? According to the customs of the Supreme Palace enclosure, a crowning ceremony would be held at the age of 20, which was the so-called coming-of-age ceremony. Before the crowning ceremony was held, juniors like Changhua did not even have the right to step into the ancestral hall of the clan. In the past, during the clan meeting, Changhua often ran outside with his peers to peek at the meeting. Therefore, he knew the head of the family and the other elders. Therefore, after hearing Genrio's reminder, Changhua immediately stopped on the steps and then bowed to the people in the courtyard. He clasped his fist and bowed. Changhua is here to greet the head of the family, father and elders. There was nothing wrong with Chenghua's words. However, his behavior was obviously very problematic. In front of the head of the family as a junior, how could Changhua not kneel? This was a great crime of disrespect. Genrio saw all of this, but as a father he could only be anxious at the side and did not dare to say anything to remind him. Could it be that he had to remind the head of the family to punish Changhua for his great disrespect? Genrio was very anxious in his heart. That was because he did not know that Changhua had changed. Changhua had been by Qianxi's side for too long and had also lived for a long time in modern society. Therefore, unknowingly, Chenghua's understanding of this world had undergone a great change. The two of them are also human, everyone is equal. It's just a meal, what's the big deal? Come, sit down and eat together, try my cooking. Qin Xueqing did not allow the two of them to take half a step into the inner courtyard, but Qin Shi opened his mouth and let the two of them directly sit at the dining table. This was just a small matter, but this small matter left an extremely deep impression on Changhua. From the daily diet to the leisure time, Qin Shi's every move affected him and Yiji almost all the time. The reason why they did not notice anything unusual in the past was that the two of them had not returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure yet. It was also because of this that when Changhua returned this time he realized that he seemed to be somewhat out of tune with the things around him. It was not that he did not know etiquette. It was purely that he did not want to kneel. Why are you kneeling? Stand up, haven't you heard that men have gold under their knees? Stand up straight for me. At this moment, Chenghua's mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts. So much so that he even started to miss Earth. Xianyuan Wuang did not know what Changhua was thinking. Moreover, he did not know what Changhua was thinking at all. Yuanliang, lead the way. Let's talk somewhere else. Xianyuan Wuang came here today with a purpose, so he did not want to waste too much time on these trivial matters. At his command, the master let Genrio lead everyone to sit in the main hall of the courtyard one by one. After that, in front of everyone present, Changhua repeated everything he had just said to Zhang. His reaction was more or less the same as Zhang's. After everyone heard that Changhua had been living in Mr. Chen's house all this time, the expressions on their faces were as interesting as it could be. After Changhua roughly recounted his experience, he stood to the side and quietly waited for the master to ask questions. After pondering for a while, the master frowned and asked softly, "In other words, Mr. Chen has already taken you in?" It was no wonder that everyone understood this. After all, the Supreme Palace enclosure was not Earth. Other than Qin Shi, who would take a captive in their own house and provide them with good food and drinks. Master, Mr. Chen did not take me in as a disciple. He just let me live in his house and gave me a few pointers when he was free. Changhua tried his best to explain. Hearing this, Xianyuan Wuang replied with a look of sudden realization. I think it's because your cultivation levels are too low. Mr. Chen was afraid that you two would embarrass him, so he didn't give you a master and disciple status. If that's the case, you really can't claim to be his disciple. As soon as this was said, the 8 elders suddenly seemed to have figured something out. They could not help but nod in agreement. Master, you're right. Seeing that this misunderstanding was getting bigger and bigger, Changhua hesitated for a moment, but in the end he forced himself to swallow the words that had already been on the tip of his tongue. Anyway, there was nothing wrong with being Mr. Chen's disciple. Since everyone had to understand it this way, he could only let it be. At worst, he would go back and explain it to Mr. Chen properly. Anyway, he did not use Mr. Chen's name to swindle people everywhere. Changhua believed that he had a clear conscience, so he did not dwell on this issue any longer. Since Xianyuan Wang had asked what he wanted to ask and understood what he needed to understand, Changhua guessed that it was time for them to leave, so he tactfully excused himself and left the main hall. Of course, he did not go far. Instead, he waited silently outside the house so that he could send the elders off later. Changhua stood outside the door and waited, bored to death. However, at this moment his name suddenly rang out in the main hall. Yuanliang, you really have a good son. This child is called Changhua, right? What are his birth characters? Is he betrothed now? Coincidentally, I have a niece. She's 16 years old and has yet to be betrothed. I wonder, Yuanliang, are you willing to become my in-laws? At that moment, Changhua felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. Before Genrio could even open his mouth to reply, he rushed into the main hall as if he had been electrocuted. Then in front of the master he shouted at everyone, "No!" Chapter 5:11. No. Chenghua's sudden intrusion instantly interrupted everyone's conversation. Looking at his nervous and agitated expression, the patriarch did not directly reprimand him for his lack of manners. Instead he asked with a smile, "Why not?" At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Changhua. That's right, why not? As the cultivation of an immortal cultivator increased, the probability of having children would gradually decline. Therefore, immortal cultivators would usually try to get married and have children as soon as possible before they made a major breakthrough in their cultivation, so as to avoid the tragedy of having no one to send them off in the future. Even young people like Changhua, who had not yet had a coronation ceremony, were mostly already married at this age. The meaning of life was to reproduce and multiply. In the words of the ancient people, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and the worst was to have no descendants. Because his eldest brother, Genyuan Jingqi, had already gotten married and had 2 sons, Genrio did not urge Changhua to get married and have children. He had originally planned to wait until after Chenghua's coronation ceremony to find a good family for Changhua. Who would have thought that, after Chenghua's trip to the Tianshu ruins, he had become a hot commodity in everyone's eyes. In addition to a few elders who expressed their desire to become in-laws with him, it seemed that even the patriarch had this intention. Since ancient times, regardless of the social system, marriage was the most common way to establish relations. Since Changhua had the title of supreme disciple, wouldn't a marriage alliance with him mean that they would suddenly have a huge backer behind them? Even if they accidentally provoked the 4 great spiritual masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven in the future, the 4 great spiritual masters would probably be a little more lenient on account of Great Supreme Master Chen. Therefore, even if Chenghua's behavior was a little rude, no one had the intention to blame him. Instead, they smiled and sized up Changhua. After hearing the patriarch's question, Changhua could not help but be stunned. He did not know why he objected to this suggestion. After all, cultivators were different from mortals. It would not be an exaggeration to describe the life of an immortal cultivator as a wandering and magnificent life. For immortal cultivators, the concept of home was more like an organization that they could rely on, since a man could have 3 wives and 4 concubines. In other words, a woman could naturally have 3,000 male companions. The so-called love was stronger than gold and unswerving until death. This kind of thing did not work in the Supreme Palace enclosure at all. Changhua hesitated, not knowing how to answer the patriarch's question. Seeing this, the clan head laughed and said, "Could it be that you already have someone in mind? Which family are you from? If you don't mind, this old man can be a matchmaker for you." After hearing the patriarch's words, Changhua couldn't help but think of a cold and aloof figure. However, as that figure became clearer and clearer in his mind, Changhua couldn't help but shudder. Then he quickly replied, "Thank you for your concern, patriarch. It's not like I have someone in mind. It's just that. At this point, Changhua couldn't help but pause for a moment. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he couldn't help but quickly add, "It's just that I haven't reached the age of one yet." That's why I haven't considered the personal matters of my children before. Now that I've suddenly heard the elders mention this matter, I can't help but feel a little uneasy in my heart. I hope the elders won't blame me. Since they were talking about marriage, Changhua naturally had to act like a junior. Anyway, they were all family. There was nothing wrong with him calling himself the grandson in front of the patriarch. Using the reason that he was underage, Changhua tactfully rejected the good intentions of the elders. But what he didn't expect was, after hearing his words, the patriarch still laughed and said, "The coronation ceremony is just a kind of ceremony. It just so happens that tomorrow is the 15th of the first lunar month. When the time comes, come to the ancestral temple and this old man will personally crown you. How about it?" Because there were too many people in the Xianyuan family, the coronation ceremony didn't happen immediately after the age of 20. Instead, it had to be done in batches. Usually, it would be chosen at an auspicious time, and the elders and deacons would perform the ceremony for the juniors. The higher the status of the person in the family, the more grand the coronation ceremony would be. For Changhua to have the patriarch personally crown him in the ancestral temple was already a privilege that only the direct bloodline of the Xianyuan family could enjoy. Genryo relied on his cultivation to become one of the 8 elders. So in terms of bloodline, Changhua was far from being qualified to enter the ancestral temple. Therefore it could be said that the patriarch of the Xianyuan family was giving Xianxia enough face. Seeing that the patriarch had said so, the elders all nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Changhua seemed to be a little unwilling to give up and said, "When I left Tianshu, I promised Mr. Chen that I would only be back for 7 days. So this marriage..." Changhua struggled hard. However, before he could finish his words, the patriarch interrupted him. 7 days? That's enough. When your wedding is over, I'll send someone to escort you all the way back to Tianshu. How about that? Let's settle this matter then. Yuanliang, I'll leave this matter to you. Tomorrow morning, I'll perform the coronation ceremony for your good son at the ancestral temple. There was no room for negotiation at all. After saying this, the patriarch left the courtyard with his people. Only a dumbfounded Changhua was left behind, as well as his excited old father. Coronation ceremony, marriage. At the same time, the status of the family rose sharply. Ever since Changhua and Yiji returned home, everything they experienced was so similar. The Tuoba family had already fallen. So, how could the Xianyuan family and the Dongfang family, who were also the 3 major families of Ningzhou, not be prepared at all? No matter what the relationship between the 2 of them and Mr. Chen. In short, it would not be wrong to please the 2 of them. Therefore, after the 2 of them went through a series of friendly greetings, they were pushed into the ancestral temple in a daze under the gaze of thousands of people. From the moment the 2 patriarchs personally held the coronation ceremony for the 2 of them, Changhua and Yiji officially set foot on the peak of their lives. Felt like a dream. Everything came so suddenly. In a daze, the 2 teenagers were in their own ancestral temples. At the same time, they put on the red and black crowns that were unique to adults. The ceremony is complete. Bow to the ancestors. As the ceremony was completed, there was a burst of lively cheers outside the ancestral temples of the Xianyuan and Dongfang families. People couldn't help but cheer for the crowns. It was as if there was only joy left in the world. However, no one would have thought, just as the 2 of them were about to complete their coronation ceremony, an earth-shattering sound suddenly came from the horizon. Boom! In an instant, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Evil wind blew. Chapter 5:12. The sudden turn of events alarmed everyone. The sun was still shining brightly earlier, but in the blink of an eye, the sky in the distance had become so gloomy that it was about to rain. Seeing that a storm was about to come, the people outside the ancestral temple could not help but whisper to each other. What's going on? The weather is so abnormal. Did something big happen in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven? Like the Great World, there were no stars near the Supreme Palace enclosure, so the changes in the weather and the movement of the sun and moon were all controlled by the formation. The core of the Supreme Palace enclosure's formation was in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. Now that the weather had suddenly changed, the first reaction of the people present was to guess if something had happened in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. Thick black clouds covered the entire sky, and the sky was as dark as ink that had dripped into water. Looking from afar, the black clouds surged over one after another, like the ferocious and terrifying faces of monsters. Like the low growl of a vicious dog before it pounced on its prey, the thunder in the sky accumulated power for a while before it suddenly burst out with an earth-shattering sound. Rumble. Rumble. In an instant, the thunder rumbled and the wind howled. In front of such a terrifying scene, no one had any intention of hiding. Instead, they all looked up at the distant sky. In the ancestral temple, the moment Xinyuan Wuang heard the thunder, he stopped the warning and blessing he was about to say to Changhua. Instead, he quickly walked out of the ancestral temple with a serious face. When the 8 elders saw this, they all followed behind him and walked out of the ancestral temple. Changhua was supposed to be the main character of today's ceremony. However, the moment the thunder sounded, he completely became a side character that no one cared about. Seeing that no one cared about him, Changhua did not bother to care about the complicated etiquette. He directly took off the white crown on his head and hugged it in his arms. Then he quietly moved to Genrio's side. "Father, did something big happen?" The patriarch and the 8 grand elders stood proudly on the steps facing the demonic wind. After hearing Chenghua's question, Genrio frowned and glared at him. He then quickly scolded him in a low voice. "Silence." "Oh, okay." Changhua had never seen such a scene before. Therefore, when he heard Genrio's reprimand, he could only shrink his head in confusion and obediently stand behind the crowd, not daring to make any noise. Rumble. Rumble. The sound of rolling thunder reverberated in the air. One after another, there was not a single moment of rest. It lasted for about 2 minutes before the deafening thunder gradually subsided. "What's going on?" Like Changhua, most of the young people outside the ancestral temple had blank looks on their faces. They had no idea what had just happened. Changhua stole a glance at his father. He realized that his father's expression was somewhat strange. There was a hint of nervousness, excitement, and even a hint of excitement. Could it be something good was about to happen? In the past, Changhua would not have the right to stand on the steps outside the ancestral temple. Today he had a rare opportunity to do so. Naturally, he wanted to experience the feeling of standing at the top. However, at this moment, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders, who were standing at the front, suddenly knelt on one knee and shouted in unison, "Yes, Shenren." Seeing this, Changhua was stunned. This was because he had no idea what had just happened. Seeing the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders kneeling on the ground, Changhua was stunned for a moment. He could only follow suit and kneel down immediately. However, the moment he knelt down, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders stood up again. This was great. Changhua did not know whether he should kneel or stand now. Forget it. This is fate. It can't be changed. Yuan Liang explained to this child first. If Mr. Qin wants to blame someone in the future, I don't think he will be the one to blame. The dark clouds in the sky did not disperse and the thunder stopped. The patriarch of the Xianyuan family looked at Changhua with a complicated expression and shook his head gently. Then he led the rest of the elders back to the ancestral temple. Explain? Explain what? Hearing this, Changhua could not help but feel confused. He was about to ask when Genrio's voice suddenly rang in his head. It was a voice transmission. His father was transmitting a voice transmission to him. After listening to Genrio's explanation, Changhua finally understood what had just happened. So, the thunder just now was not a natural phenomenon. It was caused by the thunder drum of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. The so-called thunder drum was a special method used by the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven to transmit information to the various forces in the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was roughly equivalent to the radio station on Earth, and it was the encrypted kind. Only when one's cultivation reached a certain level could they hear the message that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven wanted to transmit from the thunder. The reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven suddenly sounded the thunder drum today was completely because a grand event that happened once in 100 years was coming. What was a grand event? The meeting of the 3 enclosures was a grand event. Changhua had heard many rumors about the 3 enclosures since he was young. The so-called 3 enclosures were the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure, and the Heavenly Market enclosure. Legend had it that a long time ago the 3 enclosures were originally a complete planet. Later on, something happened that caused the planet to be torn apart and turned into the 3 enclosures of today. Like the Supreme Palace enclosure, The crepe myrtle enclosure and the heavenly market enclosure were also plate-shaped landmasses that had been drifting in this vast universe for thousands of years. Because there were no stars to guide them, there was no trace of the three enclosures' whereabouts. The Supreme Palace enclosure was now near the solar system. Perhaps the Supreme Palace enclosure was still on the other side of the Milky Way 100,000 years ago. The three enclosures would meet once every 100 years, and the principle of its operation was still unknown. According to the speculation of a senior expert in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, the reason why the three enclosures would meet at regular intervals should be related to the arrangements left behind by the ancient powerhouses. In other words, the three enclosures were still hiding some shocking secrets that had not been discovered by anyone. In order to uncover this secret, since the establishment of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, its successive sect masters had been secretly searching for the truth. After various efforts, they finally found a clue. This clue came from Great Illusionary Land. Cheng-Hua knew about the three enclosures, but he had never heard of the Great Illusionary Land. Therefore, after hearing this term, he could not help but interrupt Genryo and asked directly, "Father, I still don't understand what you mean. This Great Illusionary Land, what does it have to do with me?" Hearing this, a meaningful smile suddenly appeared on Genryo's face. He reached out and patted Cheng-Hua's shoulder, then whispered in Cheng-Hua's ear, "Prepare well, your opportunity is here." Chapter 513. For a junior like Cheng-Hua, the Great Illusionary Land was an extremely unfamiliar term. However, for existences like Genryo and even the Xianyuan family head, the Great Illusionary Land was a good place that symbolized opportunities and fortuitous encounters. Although the Great Illusionary Land was a specific name, it did not have a specific address. That was because the address it appeared at every time was not fixed. The Great Illusionary Land would only appear briefly in a thick fog on the day when the three enclosures converged. Every 100 years, the three enclosures would gradually get closer and more or less join together under the influence of an unknown force. Just like Asia, America, and Europe, if a sea was filled in between the three enclosures, then one could roughly see its original appearance when looking from afar in the starry sky. Once upon a time it was also a complete planet. Every time the three enclosures converged, the fluctuation of the spirit energy of heaven and earth would become unusually intense, so much so that the spirit energy would gradually form a fog that would gradually cover the entire sky. At this time, one only needed to follow the spirit energy all the way. The place with the densest spirit energy would be the place where the Great Illusionary Land appeared. Unlike the unknown dangers of the Tianshu ruins, the Great Illusionary Land had real benefits. Genryo had a deep understanding of this problem. After all, if he had not been lucky enough to obtain the qualifications to enter the Great Illusionary Land and obtained many benefits from it, then Genryo, who was only from a collateral bloodline, would not have been able to sit in the position of the 8 Great Elders. At this point, it was necessary to first mention the so-called social resources and class consolidation. In fact, whether it was Earth or the Great Illusionary Land, except for some lucky people who were favored by the heavens, it was actually very difficult for ordinary people to climb from the bottom of society to the top of society. The Great Illusionary Land did not have a college entrance examination, so the Great Illusionary Land was the only way for everyone to reach the top in one step. Once one entered the Great Illusionary Land, all the opportunities and fortuitous encounters were in front of one's eyes. But it was a pity. The Great Illusionary Land could only allow 3,000 people to enter at a time. 3,000 people sounded like a lot. However, if it was placed in the entire Great Illusionary Land, this number was too small. Just Ning State alone had the Xianyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families, as well as many slightly weaker mid-sized families. Moreover, besides the Ning Prefecture, there were still 8 other prefectures in the Supreme Palace enclosure that weren't inferior to the Ning Prefecture at all. Since everyone wanted to go in and get a share of the pie, then these 3,000 spots naturally needed to be properly distributed. Thus, with the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven taking the lead, the slots were accurately allocated to the various forces according to their overall strength. The thunderclap drum earlier was actually an announcement to the various great powers about the number of slots they would be able to obtain this time. This was the fundamental reason why Cheng-Hua had never heard of the existence of the Great Illusionary Land before. The quota was limited. Therefore, the fewer people who knew about the existence of the Great Illusionary Realm, the better. Otherwise, wouldn't those bumpkins from small families rebel against the heavens and swarm into the great illusionary realm to change their fates? Therefore, it could be said that this was a carnival for the upper class of the Supreme Palace enclosure, and it had nothing to do with the general public. It was probably because the Tuoba family had suffered a heavy blow a few days ago, so during the distribution this time, the Xianyuan family and the Dongfang family were both given 3 slots, one more than before. Regarding this, the Xianyuan family patriarch was naturally overjoyed, so he immediately returned to the ancestral temple and used the excuse of inspecting the cultivation progress of his clansmen as an excuse to launch a large clan meeting that involved the entire Xianyuan family. Although it was called a large clan meeting, it was actually a martial arts competition. Anyone whose cultivation was above the Golden Core realm and below the Yuanying realm could sign up. As long as one obtained the top 3, they would be allowed to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. What needed to be mentioned here was, there was no requirement to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Even the Yuanying and Soul Formation cultivators could enter at will. However, as long as one Soul Formation cultivator entered the Great Illusionary Realm, then the 3,000 spots would immediately be reduced to 2,000 or even less. According to past experience, it was basically certain that the benefits of entering the Great Illusionary Realm with 3,000 Golden Core cultivators were the greatest. Therefore, the Golden Core cultivators became the key targets of the various forces. Only the strongest among them were qualified to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Cheng Hua's cultivation was only at the middle stage of the Golden Core realm. Logically speaking, he was not qualified to know the inside story in advance. Considering that his master was the great Supreme Qin, the patriarch could not help but place high hopes on him. After all, he was the disciple of the Supreme Qin. Although his cultivation was slightly lower with his actual combat ability, he should not be too bad, right? However, nobody would have thought, after hearing Genrio's words, Cheng Hua said hesitantly, "Father, can I not participate?" "What?" Genrio looked as if he had seen a ghost. It should be noted that the reason why Cheng Hua's elder brother did not enter the Great Illusionary Realm back then was that there was no 3rd spot, so he could only stay in the top 3. Now that there was an extra spot, Cheng Hua actually wanted to give it up directly? Was there a mistake? Thinking of this, Genrio only felt a surge of anger in his heart rushing to his head. However, considering that this matter could not be forced, after taking a deep breath, Genrio forced himself to calm down and said, "Why don't you want to participate? Mr. Qin only gave me 7 days. Seeing his father's unfriendly expression, Cheng Hua could only answer honestly, "After 7 days I must return to Tianshu. Otherwise, with Mr. Chen's temperament, it's very likely that he will personally come to the Supreme Palace enclosure to ask me to return." After hearing the 3 words Mr. Qin, Genrio's eyelids twitched obviously. With the Tuoba family as an example, nobody dared to provoke Mr. Qin in Tianshu. However, was this really going to be a waste of this opportunity? Well, you have to think carefully. Some people are willing to waste 100 years and force themselves to stay in this realm with the purpose of exploring the Great Illusionary Land. Although you are a disciple of a supreme being, what Mr. Qin can give you may not be as much as what the Great Illusionary Land can give you. When the 4 words Great Illusionary Land were mentioned, Genrio's face clearly flashed with a strange light. However, due to some unspoken agreement, he could not tell Cheng Hua what exactly was in the Great Illusionary Land. Moreover, are you so sure that you can easily win the 1st place and obtain a spot to enter the Great Illusionary Land? After hearing Genrio say this, Cheng Hua was stunned for a moment. That's right. Ever since he found out that he had to compete to obtain a spot, Cheng Hua's first reaction was that he could not participate. Otherwise, if he did not return to Tianshu on time, Mr. Qin would definitely be angry. In Cheng Hua's subconscious mind, as long as he participated in the clan meeting, then he would definitely be able to defeat everyone and successfully obtain the qualification to enter the Great Illusionary Land. He seemed to be a little too confident. Chapter 5:14. Due to the lack of time, the patriarch immediately announced the start of the great clan meeting after receiving the news from the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. This was a grand event that concerned the future of the Xianyuan family. In this grand event, regardless of whether it was the Xianyuan family's collateral bloodline, or the relatives who were related to the Xianyuan family through marriage, or even some criminals who had violated the family rules, regardless of birth or background. As long as one's cultivation was above the golden core stage and below the yuanying stage, one would be qualified to participate in the Great Clan Meeting. Of course, most people did not know what the Great Clan Meeting meant because the Great Illusionary Realm was too far away for them. But even so, everyone wanted to do their best in this Great Clan Meeting and strive to get a good ranking. This grand event was not only related to the Great Illusionary Realm, but also related to everyone's status in the family. Just like how ancient emperors would always pardon the world before they ascended the throne at this moment, it did not matter whether one was born poor or guilty. As long as they could get a good ranking in the Great Clan Meeting, they could use this opportunity to reverse their previous fate. It could be said that this was the true meaning. The fish leaped over the dragon's gate and the sky was vast. Therefore, the Great Clan Meeting was actually equivalent to Wuxia's college entrance exam. It was even fairer than the college entrance exam. Everything depended on one's strength. Xianxia had never been to the Great Palace enclosure, so she did not know how much time would be wasted on the journey from Earth to the Great Palace enclosure. The so-called 7-day deadline was just something she said casually. Regarding this, Xianxia was more magnanimous. Considering the long journey, when Changhua and Yiji left, he even very considerately reminded them that the 7-day deadline would start from the day they reached home. Today was the second day after Chenghua's return. He originally wanted to go home and accompany his mother, but he did not expect that as soon as he got home his schedule would be packed. He really did not have a moment to rest. Under Genrio's constant persuasion, Changhua finally signed up for the Great Clan Meeting after some hesitation. After all, it was rare for the clan gathering to be held, so he wanted to use this opportunity to see how much he had improved. If he didn't make any progress, he really wouldn't have the face to see Xianxia. Under the constant urging of the patriarch, the efficiency of the stewards in the clan instantly rose to the highest level. Therefore, in less than half a day's time, this highly anticipated clan gathering ushered in its first competition. Unlike many of the spectators, Changhua did not show any excitement on his face. Instead, he stood beside the ring with a calm expression, silently watching the two parties fighting on the ring. It was as if everything had nothing to do with him. What we need to take note of here is, although the entry requirements were limited to those above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, there was no age limit. The strength of an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 100 years and an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 500 years were naturally incomparable. Because of this, many of the old fellows who had been cultivating bitterly for their entire lives but were still unable to enter the Yuanying realm were extremely excited when they heard that the clan leader was going to hold a clan meeting. As long as they could achieve a certain result in the meeting, the clan would definitely notice them. At that time, wouldn't the Yuanying stage be just around the corner? Everyone wanted to do their best for their own future, so the ruthlessness of this clan meeting was far beyond everyone's expectations. Perhaps it was because they wanted to eliminate the weak as soon as possible. Therefore, in the previous few competitions, there was no real sense of parity. Instead, most of the time, it was peak Aurus Core stage cultivators against early Aurus Core stage cultivators. Such a deliberate arrangement not only ensured that the peak Aurus Core stage cultivators could enter the final round with the strongest form, but also eliminated the weak as quickly as possible. Why not? However, what was surprising was that, even if it was always early Aurus Core stage cultivators against peak Aurus Core stage cultivators, there had never been a situation where the early Aurus Core stage cultivators gave up without a fight. There were even a few times when the early Aurus Core stage cultivators almost made a comeback. So what if they were peak Aurus Core stage cultivators? It was just a battle. What was there to be afraid of? Regardless of their cultivation level, everyone gave it their all in order to obtain a better ranking for themselves. If it wasn't for the clan meeting's explicit prohibition against self-detonating magic treasures, it was estimated that the arena would have been filled with crackling sounds. When night fell, Changhua finally welcomed his first battle. His cultivation was at the middle Aurus Core stage. Now that even he was on the stage, it meant that the early Aurus Core stage cultivators had basically been eliminated, and it was time for the middle Aurus Core stage cultivators. Chenghua's opponent was an elder from a collateral branch. Because the news of Changhua going to the Tianshu ruins was not publicized, most people did not know that he now had another identity. But even if he did not have the identity of the supreme disciple, Changhua was still Genrio's second son. So when he just appeared, it caused a big commotion. The patriarch seemed to be very interested in Chenghua's experience during this period, so he wanted to see what exactly he had learned under Qin Shi. Therefore, after hearing the news of Chenghua's appearance, the patriarch immediately led the 8 elders to the arena where Chenghua was. In the arena, Chenghua and the elder stood facing each other. The elder did not know Chenghua, but he had learned about Chenghua's identity from the onlookers, so he was extremely polite as soon as he came up. "I'm older than you, young master. Now that I have the honor of exchanging pointers with you, please make your move first." As he spoke, the old man took out his Dharma treasure. It was a simple long saber, and its rank was a 3rd-grade spirit treasure. At first glance, one could tell that it was a collection of the elders for many years. If Chenghua's phoenix perch scorched tail box was still there, then this long saber was naturally not a good item. According to the usual practice, the 2 sides should introduce their magic treasures before exchanging pointers. Therefore, the elder roughly introduced his long saber. He estimated that with Chenghua's identity, his 3rd-grade spirit treasure would not be good enough for him. Who would have thought? After hearing his introduction, Chenghua shook his head directly and then said calmly, "I won't use my magic treasure. Please make your move." At that moment, not only was the elder on the arena stunned, but even Genryo, who was flying in the sky, was also surprised. How could this child be so arrogant? Not using his phoenix perch scorched tail box, he actually wanted to fight against a peak golden elixir with his bare hands? Could a supreme disciple be so arrogant? Regarding this question, Genryo had wronged Chenghua. Because he did not know, not using magic treasures had long been a tradition of the Sai courtyard. The one who really made Chenghua decide not to rely on magic treasures to fight was actually not Qin Xueqing, who had entered the Dao through martial arts, but Qin Shi. As the saying went, "Loud voices come from afar, not from the autumn wind." You're just ordinary people. How can you understand great Supreme Master Chen's painstaking efforts? Chapter 5:15. Chenghua had also consulted Qin Shi many times when he was in a good mood regarding cultivation. Qin Shi was a supreme martial artist, so his answers were unquestionable truth to Chenghua. There were 8 methods of immortals: pills, talismans, weapon arrays, and witchcraft. Earth originally lacked the corresponding inheritance in materials, so there were very few rare and strange magic treasures. Even if there were 1 or 2, most of them were old antiques passed down from ancient times. The Supreme Palace enclosure was different from Earth. It had not experienced many changes, so compared to Earth, which lacked the inheritance of the 8 methods, the Supreme Palace enclosure was actually more like the United States, where weapons were not banned. Magic treasures were just consumer goods that could be seen everywhere. This was the reason why Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures. On one hand, it was because she entered the Dao through martial arts and her body was her most powerful weapon. On the other hand, it was completely because she had never come into contact with magic treasures. Since she had never come into contact with them, how could she understand the benefits? If it was normal that Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures, then Qin Shi, who also did not like to use magic treasures, was obviously a little abnormal. Chenghua had always thought that if the phoenix perch scorched tail box was still in his hands, Qin Xueqing could not possibly be his opponent. Therefore, after he was beaten up by Qin Xueqing, he had a discussion with Qin Shi about whether magic treasures were important or not. The result was naturally very obvious. From then on, Chenghua was infected with the bad habit of not liking to use magic treasures. In fact, with Qin Shi's current cultivation, if he really wanted to obtain a magic treasure that suited him, it would not be difficult at all. He did not even need to spend much effort to find the materials. He only needed to take a stroll in the jade clear cave heaven with the title of Supreme Martial Artist Tianshu. There were so many treasures in there, so why couldn't he just casually pick one? As long as it was not some sect guarding treasure, would the 4 perfected masters not even give this little face? So in the end, it was just that Qin Shi himself did not want it. Just like the words he always said, "There is no other reason other than the sword in your heart." Magic treasures were indeed very useful. Some magic treasures were even more powerful than the cultivator's own strength. But even so, what could they do? No matter how strong the magic treasure in his hand was, this power was still just an external force. Personal strength was the foundation of an immortal cultivator. Blindly pursuing the grade of magic treasures and neglecting one's own strength, wasn't such behavior already inferior? You don't understand? It's fine. Let me ask you the simplest question. Didn't you have a ninth-grade spirit treasure previously? If the current you with your bare hands were to face the you who used to have a ninth-grade spirit treasure, then do you think, which period would you be more powerful? With that, Xianxia smiled mysteriously and patted Chenghua's shoulder. This scene also left a deep impression on Chenghua. Actually, this thing is just like dating. The one that suits you is the best. Though the Phoenix Perch Scorchtail box is good, it does not suit you. Also, if you rely too much on external forces, other than being able to kill a few more people, it does not help your cultivation at all. So, before you truly find a Dharma treasure that suits you, I suggest that you be yourself first. After Xianxia's advice, Chenghua finally understood. This sword, it was both in his hand and in his heart. When he did not have a sword in his hand, it was time for him to take out the sword in his heart. No magic treasures. After hearing Chenghua's words, the elder's eyes flashed with joy. One had to know that the competition schedule of the clan gathering was very tight. The competition was basically one after another. There was not enough time to rest and recuperate. If he went through a fierce battle right after he appeared, then even if he could successfully enter the final round, his performance would be greatly reduced. And if he could obtain victory at the lowest cost and then face opponents of the same level in his peak state, his chances of winning would naturally increase by 30%. To the elder, the clan gathering was the only chance for him to make a comeback. Therefore, just as Chenghua finished speaking, the elder pretended to be in a difficult position and replied, "Since young master is so confident, I can only accept your favor. Young master, be careful. I am about to make my move. This move is called Wave Fanyun. Please enlighten me, young master." Even though the old man was calling himself a young master, the long saber in his hand danced with vigor and vigor. Although this move was called Wave Fanyun, it had nothing to do with water. As he waved the long saber in his hand, a streak of fire covered half of the arena like a cloud in the evening. This brat. How can he be so careless? In midair, seeing the elder attack with all his might, Genrio was so angry that he trembled. Middle stage golden elixir against peak stage golden elixir. His opponent had clearly allowed him to make the first move, but Chenghua insisted on being careless. Not only did he not use his Dharma treasure, he even allowed the elder to make the first move. What was this if not courting death? If not for the clan leader beside him, Genrio would have even appeared and reprimanded Chenghua. Genrio was extremely anxious, but the clan leader was extremely calm. It was unknown whether he had confidence in Chenghua or in Great Supreme Qin. In short, when the clan leader saw Genrio fidgeting, he immediately waved his hand and calmly comforted him. "Yuan Liang, don't be anxious. Let's watch first." The result was just as the clan leader expected. Just when everyone thought that Chenghua would be defeated by the elder in one move, Chenghua made his move. They saw, in the face of the raging flames that covered the sky, Chenghua did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward. In an instant, like a bullet, he passed through the sea of flames and came to the elder's side at the fastest speed. Before the elder could even react, Chenghua's fist brought along a strong gust of wind and smashed towards his head. A long punch from a distance and a short punch from close range. At that moment, not only did the elder not react, even the clan leader and the 8 elders who were watching from the side were stunned. Was this the move that Chenghua learned from the Supreme Qin? But why did this move seem so strange? Bang! With a muffled sound, Chenghua's fist made close contact with the elder's forehead. Chenghua had been preparing for this punch for a long time. Previously, when he stood still, he seemed to be careless. In fact, he had been observing the elder's aura and flaws. Lang Fanyun? The name sounded nice, but the move was flashy and impractical. Although the flames in the sky looked scary, the real threat to Chenghua was the long saber hidden in the flames. Therefore, Chenghua only needed to find the path of the saber and successfully avoid it. Naturally, he could easily come to the elder's side. As a result, under everyone's dumbfounded expression, Chenghua's fists were like a storm, crazily smashing on the old man's protective shield. Bang! 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 Chapter 516. Punching the Nanshan nursing home and kicking the Beihai kindergarten. Wasn't such an absurd and ridiculous scene happening right in front of everyone's eyes? Chenghua had almost perfectly inherited Qin Xueqing's lifelong learning. Therefore, as soon as this move, which was very characteristic of Earth, appeared, it immediately caused a big sensation in the crowd. Since the day the three enclosures split apart, no one had ever seen such a shameless and strange move. Shouldn't the so-called immortal cultivators be like the immortals in the myths and legends, walking, sitting and lying, showing the true colors of immortals? Immortals couldn't be like street gangsters, chasing each other with clubs and machetes, right? Therefore, when immortal cultivators fought with each other, most of them would only use magic treasures or spells to fight from a long distance. Here, ancient military formations could be used as an example. In a war, it wasn't just about which side had more people. If the cultivation of immortal cultivators was compared to the number of soldiers, then the magic treasures and moves they used when fighting were the tactical strategies arranged by the commander of the military formation. On the battlefield, the situation was changing rapidly. There were always many factors that could affect the outcome of a battle. Even if one side had few soldiers and was far less powerful than the opponent, before the real fight, no one could guarantee that the weak side would lose. The family had hoped that Xianxia could bring him a certain surprise. But what he never expected was, Xianxia not only brought him a surprise, but also a certain degree of surprise. Even if Xianxia had used tricks such as straw boats to borrow arrows and fire to achieve a narrow victory, the family head wouldn't be surprised at all. After all, Xianxia was the disciple of the Supreme Being. However, Xianxia had used a completely unimaginable way to win the battle in a one-sided manner. My younger brother, Zhang took the head of a general among millions of soldiers as easily as taking something out of his pocket. He single-handedly attacked the enemy's den. This was Xianghua's tactic. There weren't so many flashy moves and there weren't so many strange movements. There were only punches to the flesh as well as repeated attacks that accurately hit the same position. And under this storm-like attack, soon the old man's protective shield was broken. Boom! A strong gust of wind suddenly rose from the stage, and the old man's body was like a sandbag filled with cement, heavily smashing into the stage. From beginning to end, this unlucky peak Jindan stage cultivator had never fought back even once. On one hand, it was because the rules of the competition forbade the use of defensive treasures. On the other hand, it was completely because he didn't react in time. Cough, cough. Young master, you're so capable. This old man admits defeat. Looking at the expressionless Xianxia, the old man hesitated for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile. This was an arena competition. Methods such as self-detonating his golden core and burning his blood essence could not be used. Therefore, the moment the protective shield was broken, the old man had already lost the chance to make a comeback. Unless Xianxia was willing to give him time to adjust his breathing and wait until he was ready to fight again. Otherwise, if he continued to hold on, what awaited the old man was destined to be humiliation. Thank you for letting me win. Hearing the old man admit defeat, Xianxia cupped his fists and bowed to him, then slowly walked down the stage. When the audience below the stage saw Xianxia come down, they immediately divided into two lines and made a VIP passage for him. At that moment, the entire audience was silent. The crowd silently watched Xianxia. After his figure gradually disappeared into the distance, the crowd was like startled birds in the forest, and began to discuss excitedly. What's going on? He won just like that. A middle Jindan stage cultivator against a peak Jindan stage cultivator, and he won so easily? What kind of moves did they use? Did you understand? Why do I feel like I didn't see anything? Looking at the audience below who were fiercely discussing the battle situation, Shenyuan Wuang suddenly couldn't help but laugh. Yuan Liang, your second son is really lucky. After saying that, without waiting for Genrio to reply, the family head had already left with an enigmatic smile on his face. Genrio looked at the stage below thoughtfully, but he suddenly had more expectations for this precious son of his. This was the move that the Supreme Being taught? Seemed simple, but it was very effective. Of course, with Genrio's cultivation, it was not difficult to see. Xianghua's victory in this competition was mainly due to the point of winning by surprise. Presumably, his next opponent would be prepared in advance after hearing that Xianxia had such a strange technique, so it was basically impossible for him to catch them off guard again. He didn't know what kind of surprise Xianxia would bring to him in the next competition. Thinking of this, even Genrio, who had always been serious, showed a faint smile at this moment. his son had done well, and as the father he also felt proud. Immortal cultivators did not need to rest. Therefore, from the moment it started, the gathering had to continue until the end. Following this, Xianxia went through another 2 rounds of competition. However, the opponents in these 2 matches were weaker than the old man from before. Therefore, Xianxia did not spend much effort and easily defeated the 2 of them. By noon the next day, most of the weaker cultivators had been eliminated, and the competition officially entered the white-hot stage. Xianghua's 4th match was against a middle golden elixir stage cultivator. This middle golden elixir stage cultivator was incredible. Because he was of the direct bloodline, he even called the current family head uncle. The Xianyuan family had many members, and this person was older than Xianxia by 20 years, so Xianxia did not recognize him. Of course, Xianxia could not be bothered to recognize him. Speaking of which, it was strange, unknowingly, that rash and willful Xianyuan Xianxia had now become much more low-key. Therefore, in the face of this direct bloodline cultivator's provocation, Xianxia did not even have much of an emotional fluctuation. He only treated the other party as a moving sandbag that could be easily crushed. As a result, Xianxia entered the final round just like that without any suspense. The family head was not very satisfied with this result, because Xianxia had not displayed any moves other than martial arts. Moreover, he was very curious about what Xianxia had learned from Great Supreme Chen. Therefore, in order to let Xianxia display his full strength, the family head decided to play some underhanded tricks. He ordered people to replace the opponent that Xianxia was supposed to encounter, and put the person who was recognized as the strongest in this meeting in front of Xianxia in advance. This person's name was Xianyuan Wuhan. He was of the direct bloodline, and his cultivation was at the peak of the golden elixir stage. However, although Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation was high, what was truly frightening about him was actually his age. Because this year he was already 233 years old. Chapter 517. Xianyuan Wuhan. Whenever this name was mentioned in the Xianyuan clan, everyone would have some impression of him. Because he was already 230 years old this year. Furthermore, this was already the 3rd time Xianyuan Wuhan had participated in the clan gathering. According to common sense, if he hadn't stepped into yuanying when he was 200 or 300 years old, this kind of cultivation talent wasn't too bad. Yuanying wasn't that easy to condense. Many people spent their entire lives and might never be able to step over that threshold. However, Xianyuan Wuhan's situation was obviously a bit special. As a direct descendant of the Xianyuan clan, he had enjoyed unimaginable cultivation resources since he was young. Therefore, to a 2nd-generation young master like Xianyuan Wuhan who was still stuck in the Oris core stage when he was 200 or 300 years old, this was actually a rather humiliating thing. Could it be because Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation talent was too bad? However, the truth was exactly the opposite. In fact, Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation talent, even when placed in the entire Xianyuan clan, could be considered as one of the top few. This was a genius who had fallen. How high-spirited was the Xianyuan Wuhan of the past. When he participated in the clan gathering for the first time, his radiance was as dazzling as the afternoon sun, to the extent that bystanders couldn't even look straight at him. He was like the sun and moon in the sky, anyone could only be overshadowed in front of him. Therefore, when Xianyuan Wuhan easily won the first place with his absolute tyrannical strength, everyone thought that he would be another rising star of the Xianyuan clan, even possibly becoming the next celestial lord of the Tuoba clan. However, no one would have thought that, in the following 100 years, Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation actually didn't have the slightest bit of progress. When he participated in the clan gathering for the first time, his cultivation was already at the peak of the Oris core stage. 100 years had passed. At the start of the 2nd clan gathering, everyone actually saw his figure on the stage again. The bystanders were shocked by Xianyuan Wuhan's stagnation, but the young talents who competed with him in the same period felt even more despair and helplessness. Why did this grandson come again? Even if Xianyuan Wuhan's performance in the 2nd clan gathering was even more outstanding, everyone only felt that everything was to be expected. In any case, if they met him again, they would just directly admit defeat. Perhaps others could participate in the clan gathering for the 2nd or 3rd time. Only Xianyuan Wuhan could not. 100 years ago, Chenghua's elder brother, Zhenyuan Jingqi, was defeated by Xianyuan Wuhan. 100 years later, Genuan Jingqi had already stepped into the Yuanying realm, but Xianyuan Wuhan was still stuck in the Gold Core realm. It was precisely because of this, Xianyuan Wuhan had completely fallen from the altar. Even if no one at the same level could defeat him, no one would submit to him from the bottom of their hearts. However, Xianyuan Wuhan remained unmoved by the suspicions and slander of the outside world. After every clan meeting, he would disappear from everyone's sight. No one knew what he had been doing for the past 100 years, but as long as the great clan gathering began, everyone would think of this name, Xianyuan Wuhan. Because everyone wanted to know, another 100 years had passed. Was Xianyuan Wuhan still at the peak of Jindan realm? As long as he remained in the Aurus Core stage, he would always be the most talked about topic. The result was just as everyone expected. Xianyuan Wuhan came again. This was his third time participating in the great clan gathering. Along the way, many of the competitors who were unfortunate enough to meet him didn't even bother to step onto the stage, and directly stood below the stage to admit defeat. And this situation continued until Cheng-Hua appeared. When Cheng-Hua stepped onto the stage expressionlessly, including the manager who presided over this competition, almost everyone was shocked. On the stage, after Cheng-Hua stood still, Xianyuan Wuhan, who usually didn't like to speak much, took the initiative to speak for the first time. "I've seen your competition before. You have a lot of potential." Hearing this, Cheng-Hua couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Thank you for your attention, Mr. Wuhan." Cheng-Hua is very grateful. As the saying goes, the one who reaches the top comes first. Before an immortal cultivator was sure of the difference in seniority between them, they would usually address the other party as Mr. or Senior. Therefore, it wasn't a problem for Cheng-Hua to address Xianyuan Wuhan as Mr. "The moves you used in the previous few competitions were very strange. Every move you made seemed simple, but in fact it contained some kind of truth." Perhaps Xianyuan Wuhan also knew why he would suddenly meet Cheng-Hua, so he didn't immediately start fighting as he usually did. Instead, he took the initiative to chat with Cheng-Hua. The scene didn't seem to be as hostile as people imagined. Cheng-Hua was about to reply, but unexpectedly Xianyuan Wuhan suddenly changed the topic. He suddenly used a lifeless tone and calmly said, "But the realm of this cultivation technique isn't high. Although it's very ingenious, it's only limited to this. If you only rely on this cultivation technique, you shouldn't be able to last more than 10 moves against me. So I suggest you either directly admit defeat or take out some of your trump cards. Let me have a good feel of it. What's so special about the inheritance of the sovereign bloodline?" Xianyuan Wuhan didn't say the last sentence in front of everyone. Instead, he used the secret method of telepathy to send it directly to Cheng-Hua's ears. Obviously, this brother was very clear about Cheng-Hua's background. The reason why he was willing to talk nonsense with Cheng-Hua was actually entirely because of Sovereign Qin. Cheng-Hua was somewhat non-committal about this. It seemed like he was being looked down upon. It didn't matter. Let's see who's the real deal then. Therefore, Cheng-Hua didn't say anything more. He directly cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. Cheng-Hua, would Mr. Wuhan please enlighten me?" Cheng-Hua's reaction seemed to be somewhat out of Xianyuan Wuhan's expectations. Therefore, after hearing his declaration of war, a faint smile immediately appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. "Oh, come then." The battle suddenly started just like that. Cheng-Hua's figure was like a ghost and he instantly disappeared on the spot. Seeing that, Xianyuan Wuhan's reaction was completely different from the opponents that Cheng-Hua had encountered before. He didn't take out his own magic weapon. Instead, he imitated Cheng-Hua and went up to meet him with his bare hands. Both of their speeds were extremely fast. As soon as they came into contact, there was a series of bang 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 sounds of fists and feet colliding on the stage. In just a blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged a few blows. Although Cheng-Hua had already mentally prepared himself to a certain extent before this. But at this moment, only then did he truly understand how terrifying Xianyuan Wuhan was. Even though Xianyuan Wuhan hadn't learned martial arts before, he was actually able to rely on his own rich cultivation and some shallow experience that he had accumulated from watching the battle before the competition to firmly suppress Cheng-Hua. Cheng-Hua's movements were very fast, but Xianyuan Wuhan was even faster than him. Cheng-Hua's moves were very ingenious, but Xianyuan Wuhan was able to imitate him in the blink of an eye and return the favor in an instant. This was the true peak of Golden Elixir realm. In terms of cultivation, in terms of experience, in terms of skills, Changhua was still too young. And under the suppression of such absolute strength, he was like an unlucky person who had fallen into a quagmire. The harder he struggled, the faster he sank. When Xianyuan Wuhan gradually adapted to Chenghua's moves and gradually figured out some tricks from them, then Chenghua wouldn't be far from failure. Chapter 518. In the end, the martial arts that Chenghua learned was actually just a gold core stage cultivation method. In the future, as Qin Xueqing's cultivation continued to improve, this cultivation method might gradually become stronger and perfect. But before that, if Chenghua wanted to completely defeat Xianyuan Wuhan with this imperfect martial arts cultivation method, this was tantamount to a fool's dream. Xianyuan Wuhan was really too strong. The so-called invincible in the same realm was not just a saying. Xianyuan Wuhan did not even use any magic arts, nor did he use any magic treasures. He only needed to copy and learn Chenghua's moves through actual combat, and he could quickly master these moves, and then use the same moves to deal with Chenghua. The reason was not that Xianyuan Wuhan had a unique skill of giving someone a taste of their own medicine, but because the moves that Chenghua used were all on the surface, so Xianyuan Wuhan could quickly learn them for his own use. Immortal techniques were from the inside out, martial arts were from the outside in. The two seemed to be poles apart, but in fact they were different paths leading to the same goal. It was just like that old saying, the great Tao was like mercury flowing to the ground and every grain was round. On the stage, Chenghua and Xianyuan Wuhan exchanged blows quickly. Below the stage, everyone cheered for Chenghua in unison. Since Xianyuan Wuhan was the great demon king in everyone's hearts, then Chenghua, who dared to fight with the great demon king, naturally became the hero in everyone's hearts. Although everyone knew that Chenghua would definitely fail as long as he did not fall, the cheers below the stage would not stop for a moment. The two figures were like ghosts as they moved quickly on the stage. In just 10 minutes, the two had already exchanged no less than 200 moves. And as the two fought longer and longer, Chenghua also gradually showed signs of defeat. Just like a sports competition, when the skills and experience of the two sides were almost the same, physical strength became the most important deciding factor. Maintaining the protective shield consumed true essence, and every attack also consumed true essence. Chenghua was merely in the middle stage of the gold core realm. How could he fight with Xianyuan Wuhan, who was in the peak stage of the gold core realm for a long time? At that moment, any onlooker with a little bit of knowledge could see that Chenghua's defeat was inevitable. This child, he's already been forced to this point, but he's still not willing to show his true abilities. Yuan Liang, do you think he really only knows these moves, or does he have other plans in mind? The patriarch and the 8 elders were still watching the battle from the sky. After hearing the patriarch's question, Genrio fell silent. He did not respond. That was because he knew, regarding Chenghua's current performance, the patriarch was indeed somewhat disappointed. To be honest, if Chenghua wasn't a sovereign disciple, he wouldn't even have the qualifications to exchange blows with Xianyuan Wuhan. No matter how the outside world slandered and insulted Xianyuan Wuhan, in the patriarch's eyes, Xianyuan Wuhan would always be the person who had the most hope of breaking through to become a heavenly venerable after him. Outsiders didn't know the trick and only thought that Xianyuan Wuhan's potential had been squeezed dry. In reality, it was Xianyuan Wuhan himself who was unwilling to break through to become a Yuanying. In order to be able to repeatedly enter the great illusionary land, Xianyuan Wuhan had suppressed himself for 200 years. Even the patriarch couldn't help but be amazed by such boldness. There aren't that many geniuses in the world to begin with, and all those who have appeared out of nowhere are those who have accumulated in the past. Compared to Xianyuan Wuhan, Chenghua instantly became ordinary. As expected, after another 100 to 200 moves, Chenghua accidentally revealed an extremely small flaw because of his lack of strength. Xianyuan Wuhan keenly found this flaw, so he grabbed the opportunity and directly hit Chenghua's chest with a crushing punch. Bam! Accompanied by a muffled sound, a strong gust of wind blew on the stage. Chenghua's body was like a sandbag, and he was directly sent flying 20 meters away by Xianyuan Wuhan's attack. After Xianyuan Wuhan punched again, he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he suddenly stopped and silently waited for Chenghua to stand up from the ground again. Unlike the people below the stage who were sighing and lamenting, Chenghua appeared very relaxed. After Chenghua stood up from the ground, he politely cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. Then he said calmly, "Sir, you're very capable. I admit defeat." Although this punch didn't cause any substantial damage to Changhua, he still admitted defeat very straightforwardly. After all, Xianyuan Wuhan didn't use any Dharma treasures or spells. He could actually easily defeat Changhua with just a half-baked martial arts move that he learned on the spot. Even if he continued to fight, wouldn't he be humiliating himself? Anyway, Changhua wasn't interested in the great illusionary land. Since he lost, then he would just admit defeat straightforwardly. Perhaps because he was used to being trampled by Qin Xueqing, Changhua didn't care about winning or losing at all. After admitting defeat, he turned around and prepared to leave. However, just as Changhua admitted defeat and left, Xianyuan Wuhan's voice suddenly sounded behind him. "I heard that Mr. Qin once fought against the 4 immortals of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven by himself. So I originally thought that this master of the heavenly pivot must have some great ability to maneuver unhindered and invincible. Who would have thought that after seeing him today I would know that the rumors were also untrue?" At this point, Xianyuan Wuhan suddenly couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. "Supreme Being? That's all." Xianyuan Wuhan's voice was very soft, but his tone was full of mockery. It was obvious that he was implying something with these words. So Changhua immediately stopped in his tracks. He slowly turned around and the expression on his face finally became serious. "I know, you said this just to provoke me to fight you with all my strength. But I still want to remind you, you can scold me but you shouldn't have brought Mr. Qin into this." As he spoke, Changhua stretched out his right hand. Then without any movement from Changhua, a long sword with a cold blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air. "Come on. Don't you all want to know what I learned from Mr. Qin? Then I'll show you today. What exactly did I learn?" He didn't know when it started, but the figure who smiled all day to make his daughter happy had become an absolutely inviolable existence in Chenghua's mind. Xianyuan Wuhan could say that he wasn't good at learning, but he definitely couldn't say that Mr. Chen's reputation was undeserved. Including Genrio, the patriarch, the 8 elders and Xianyuan Wuhan who was in front of him at this moment, almost everyone was eager to know what peerless cultivation method Changhua had learned from Qinshi. Was the cultivation method used by a supreme being really that important? Thinking of this, Changhua couldn't help but lower his head slightly to look at the long sword in his hand. In a trance, he saw the scene of Qinshi holding the little fellow and standing in the courtyard with a smile on his face. Yes, Changhua was very lucky. Others would lose their lives in vain if they went to the Tianshu ruins. Not only was he fine when he went to the Tianshu ruins, but he was also lucky enough to live with Supreme Qin for a period of time. But who would have thought that, during this period of time, what really benefited Changhua was Mr. Chen's way of dealing with people. Qinshi indeed didn't accept Changhua as his disciple, and he had never even planned to do so. But in Chenghua's heart, Qinshi was still half his master. It was just that he didn't dare to say it out loud. So, Xianyuan Wuhan could scold him, but he couldn't scold Mr. Qin. Chapter 519. With the idea of clearing Mr. Chen's name, Changhua brazenly drew his sword. The 3-foot-long sword in his hand drew a semicircle in the air, and the tip of the sword pointed directly in Xianyuan Wuhan's direction. The distance between the two of them was about 20 meters. The moment Changhua pointed his long sword at Xianyuan Wuhan sensed a strong murderous aura surging toward him. But what made Xianyuan Wuhan slightly surprised was, although Chenghua's murderous aura was strong, the long sword in his hand did not show any signs of vital essence fluctuation. It was just like a lifeless wooden stick. Xianyuan Wuhan looked at Changhua with slight confusion. But then he could not help but show a trace of seriousness on his face. "No, something's wrong." Chenghua's murderous aura was so strong, but there was no sign of vital essence fluctuation around him. Under such circumstances, unless Changhua was deliberately mystifying, this sword was definitely extraordinary. So Xianyuan Wuhan immediately mobilized his vital essence and surrounded himself in it. At the same time, Changhua had also finished accumulating power and raised his hand to wave the long sword in his hand. "Mr. Wuhan, please enlighten me." Changhua roared fiercely, and the long sword in his hand suddenly bloomed with a dazzling light. Before the sword was drawn, the sword chi became one, hidden but not released. The sword momentum was released. In an instant, like a long river hanging upside down, it soared into the sky and into the clouds. Wherever the sword light went, it could be said that heaven and earth lost their color, and the sun and moon turned away in shame. The ultimate sword was only for a moment of youth. Just as Cheng-Hua waved this sword, the family head who had been watching the battle in the air, suddenly changed his expression. This sword, why was it so similar to the rumors? As one of the three major families in Ningzhou, the Xianyuan family was naturally very concerned about the Tuoba family's change. There were rumors that the reason why Tuoba Yi was seriously injured and had to escape to death was because he was hit by Mr. Chen's sword. One had to know that Tuoba Yi was an Empyrean-level existence. But he couldn't even take one hit from Mr. Chen. Such a strange situation, just thinking about it made one's hair stand on end. After all, the outside world didn't know what exactly happened at that time, so it was inevitable that everyone would speculate too much about this incident. As the person involved in the incident, Tuoba Yi had been recuperating in seclusion. As for Daoist Master Void Pierce Stage, due to his identity, it was impossible for him to personally appear and refute the rumors. This also caused the rumors to become more and more outrageous. Many people were even guessing whether Xianxia had already touched the threshold of the semi-sage realm. Otherwise, how could he explain his magnificent feat of fighting against 4 opponents in the Jade Pure Cave Heaven? Since Mr. Chen was so powerful as his direct disciple, Cheng-Hua should have learned something, right? The patriarch had high hopes for Cheng-Hua, so he sent Xianyuan Wuhan to test Cheng-Hua. The result was just as the patriarch had hoped. Cheng-Hua was successfully enraged by Xianyuan Wuhan. Thus he no longer held back, and his first move was a killing move. It was like pressing the shutter of a camera. As a strong light flashed, time suddenly stopped. Everyone felt their minds go blank. By the time they came back to their senses, Xianyuan Wuhan's tall and sturdy body that couldn't be considered to have landed directly flew backwards. Accompanied by a strong gust of wind, Xianyuan Wuhan fell heavily to the ground. Puff! There were no obvious wounds on Xianyuan Wuhan's body, but the violent impact still caused him some internal injuries, so he couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. Cheng-Hua won. Looking at Xianyuan Wuhan, who fell heavily to the ground, everyone suddenly felt like they were dreaming. Are you satisfied now? This is a sword move that Mr. Chen taught me. However, Cheng-Hua's aptitude is too low and he can't master the trick, so he can only barely make a pose. In fact, that sword move just now had exhausted all of Cheng-Hua's vital essence. But in order to protect Mr. Chen's supreme reputation, Cheng-Hua could only hold on to his last breath and pretended to be calm as he declared this victory declaration. After saying that, Cheng-Hua turned around and left very confidently. Looking at his back as he left, a thoughtful expression suddenly appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. From the moment Cheng-Hua waved the long sword in his hand, winning or losing this competition was no longer important. He not only proved himself, but also indirectly defended Mr. Chen's reputation. This sword move was indeed very powerful. But with the cultivation of the patriarch and the 8 elders, how could they not see that Cheng-Hua was already an arrow at the end of its flight at that time? Although Xianyuan Wuhan suffered internal injuries, he still had the ability to get up and fight again. Therefore, if they continued to fight, Cheng-Hua might not even be able to take one move from Xianyuan Wuhan. However, this was only an internal competition within the family after all. Since Cheng-Hua waved this sword move, then no matter what the result was, the patriarch would definitely guarantee that he would be in the top 3. In fact, when Cheng-Hua showed that sword move, even the patriarch who was watching the battle could not help but be a little tempted. If he were to use such a miraculous sword technique, what kind of power would it display? Thinking of this, the patriarch could not help but want Cheng-Hua to hand over the sword technique. However, due to Mr. Chen's illustrious reputation, he could only suppress this greed in his heart and ask Cheng-Hua indirectly. However, Cheng-Hua was not stupid. No matter how the patriarch probed, his response was always only one word, which was, Sword 1. It was neither the one sword concealing emptiness nor the great Qianyuan. It was a set of sword techniques that Xianxia created himself after hundreds of years of deliberation and deduction in the dark space after breaking through to the insightful emptiness realm. Because this set of sword techniques had been created not long ago and still needed to be perfected, Xianxia passed the first move to Cheng-Hua and Yizhi, only hoping to find more loopholes from them. Their cultivation was not high, so it was easier to see the problem when they used it. There were always risks in doing experiments, right? They were lucky that there were no problems. Therefore, when Qianxia passed on Sword 1 to them, he did not forget to repeatedly emphasize the risks involved. But the two of them were good. Not only were they not worried about whether they would be possessed by the devil, but they were diligently practicing every day, wishing that they could grasp this move in one go. In Qianxia's eyes, the two of them were experimental white mice. But in the eyes of others, the appearance of Sword 1 confirmed their identity as the supreme martial artist's disciples. Therefore, it had to be said that this was really a beautiful misunderstanding. Throughout Qianxia's life, the cultivation techniques he learned were all the top cultivation techniques in the world. First, there was the 49 styles of heaven evolution, then there was the Xiantian evil emperor saber and sword dual arts, and then there were the various treasured scriptures of the divine sect. As long as Qianxia could think of a cultivation technique, it was basically included in it. Could it be that Qianxia had nothing to do, so he wanted to create a set of cultivation techniques to play with? Of course, things were not that simple. Qianxia seemed to be creating his own cultivation technique, but in fact he was refining what he had learned in his life. Just like the sentence he taught Changhua, the most suitable for oneself was the best. Whether it was magic treasures or cultivation techniques, in fact it was the same principle. At the insightful emptiness realm, the experience of predecessors could only be used as a reference. In the future, Qianxia still needed to walk down the road by himself. Rough iron ore could no longer meet the needs of the insightful emptiness realm, so Qianxia needed to smelt these iron ore until it was refined into steel, then he could continue to use it. Qianxia personally leaned towards sword techniques. Thus, he used the Moonlight Sword technique and Dark Valley Sword technique as the foundation to create a new cultivation technique that belonged to him. The name of this sword technique was very interesting. It was called Abundant Thought Sword technique. The meaning was self-evident. Qianxia was too lazy to name it, so he used the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the order. The first style was called Sword 1 and the second style was called Sword 2. If not for the fact that he wanted to raise the level and show off a little, he would not even bother to use the traditional 1, 2 and 3. After all, wouldn't Sword 1, Sword 2 and Sword 3 be easier to write? Let's talk about it. Recently, many authors are using the main character's group writing method. I also want to try it, so there is this plot. Actually, the story is still the same story, but the way it is written is different. If it was from Qianxia's point of view, then this story would be written in the future, and the development of the story would also be different. Maybe it's because my writing is not good enough, so the ending is not very good. So sad, but I will correct it. Humans always grow strong through stumbles, you just have to get used to it. Chapter 520. What was the true purpose of the Patriarch's clan meeting? Wasn't it to select the strongest gold core cultivator so that they could obtain enough benefits for the family from the Great Illusionary Land? Therefore, after Changhua showed his strength, even if he didn't want to participate in any more competitions, the Patriarch would personally send him a spot to the Great Illusionary Land. Of course, Changhua wasn't very interested in the Great Illusionary Land. After fighting with Xianyuan Wuhan, he only wanted to take advantage of the last few days of vacation to spend more time with his mother. Then he would take the time to choose a few exquisite gifts for Nian Nian. After that, he could wait to return to Earth. Changhua didn't know the importance of the Great Illusionary Land, so he didn't know that the moment he took out Sword 1, the Patriarch had already made a decision. Next, even if he had to tie him up with a rope, he had to forcibly tie him up into the Great Illusionary Land. After all, this was a major event that could affect the future development of the Xianyuan family. The Patriarch knew that Changhua had a 7-day limit, but considering that Changhua was only going to the Great Illusionary Land for a while, it wasn't like he wouldn't come back, so he wasn't very worried about Qianxia holding him responsible in the future. For the Patriarch, this was really a very simple choice. Even if he made the worst choice, it would only delay Changhua for a while. Therefore, the Patriarch would rather let Changhua break his promise to Qianxia than miss this once-in-a-century opportunity. Whether it was for Changhua or the Xianyuan family, the Great Illusionary Land had great opportunities. Why would Xianyuan Wuhan rather forcibly seal his cultivation and waste 200 years than break through to the Yuanying realm? It was because the benefits that the Great Illusionary Land could bring had far exceeded his expectations. There were too many people like Xianyuan Wuhan. Therefore, Changhua's trip to the Great Illusionary Land was imperative. Therefore, under the secret efforts of the various forces, the 3,000 candidates were quickly confirmed and reported to the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. When the 3 enclosures converged, it would be the start of the grand event. Now back to Qianxia. After he seriously discussed the issue of puppy love with the little fellow, Xianxia could finally put his hanging heart down for the time being. The cabbage at home hadn't even sprouted a bud yet, and the piglets outside already couldn't wait to eat it. Xianxia wanted to see. Who would dare? Humph. It had to be said that ever since Xianxia had taken precautions in his heart, he now felt that the other party was a thief, and the worst kind of vegetable thief. As a matter of fact, when Xianxia brought the little fellow to school the next day, an extremely serious expression hung on his face. His pair of eagle-like eyes were even more unbridled as they scanned the surroundings. With his current nervous appearance, those who didn't know better would probably think that he was transporting banknotes. Bye daddy, bye mommy. Unlike Xianxia's vigilance, the little fellow behaved as usual, as if yesterday's love letter incident did not put too much of a psychological burden on her. Therefore, after she smiled and waved goodbye to her parents, she ran into the school gate like a wisp of smoke. As the class monitor, she naturally had to set an example. Therefore, she had to be the first to sit in the classroom before her classmates arrived. Nian had already woken up early enough, but there were still many children in the class who woke up earlier than her. It was not that these children were more diligent than her, but because most of these children lived far away, coupled with the fact that the morning rush hour in Shangjing was too congested, their parents had no choice but to send their children to school early every day and then rush to work. Living in Shangjing was really not easy. How could a rich second generation like Nian understand the hardships? As usual, when Nian arrived at the classroom, there were already a lot of people sitting sparsely in the classroom. Some children gathered together and chatted about games, while others chased and played at the back of the classroom. Not sure who shouted "Class monitor is here," but a few mischievous children stopped what they were doing and returned to their seats. Looking at this situation, Nian, the class monitor, was almost synonymous with the teacher. Nian was very satisfied with the self-awareness of her classmates, so she went back to her seat. Because of yesterday's love letter incident, she did not immediately take out her textbook after putting down her bag. Instead, she bent down and looked at her drawer. Sure enough, there was another thing that did not belong to her. It was a piece of chocolate. Because Changhua and Yiji loved to eat chocolate, Nian also ate a lot with them, so she could be considered as knowledgeable. This type of chocolate was very common in the supermarket called Ferrero. Usually there were 3 in a box, and a box cost 9 yuan. For adults, 9 yuan was naturally nothing, not to mention that there was only one here and it did not even have a complete packaging. But for elementary school students who did not have much pocket money, Ferrero's status was far above spicy sticks and potato chips. After all, he only bought one for 3 yuan. You could only eat 1 bite each. From this, it could be seen that this anonymous confessor's feelings for Nian could be considered true love. The moment Nian saw the chocolate, she could not help but hesitate for a moment, then she took it out of the drawer. Regardless of who gave her this piece of chocolate, she would never eat it. Because, whether it was Xianxia or Aunt Zhang, both of them had taught her not to eat things given by others. Therefore Nian did not even bat an eyelid. She took the chocolate, turned around and walked directly to the trash can at the back of the classroom. Children who were arranged to sit next to the trash can by the teacher were usually the most mischievous children in the class. Therefore, when this child saw Nian throw the chocolate into the trash can, his eyes immediately lit up. This is chocolate. Class monitor, you don't want it? Then I'll take it. This kid was very mischievous. He had already noticed that Nian was holding Ferrero's chocolate. The trash can had to be cleaned every afternoon, so the moment this golden chocolate fell into the trash can, this kid very quickly picked it up. It's delicious. This child's name was Li Sanduo. His name was given casually and so was his personality. He did not mind that the chocolate was picked up from the trash can at all. He tore open the packaging and ate it happily. Nian saw that he had picked up the chocolate and was about to return to her seat. At this moment, Li Sanduo suddenly called out to her. Class monitor. If there's more good food in the future, don't throw it away, give it to me. I'll help you eat, okay? Chapter 521. Speaking of which, Li Sanduo was actually quite interesting. He wasn't tall, about half a head shorter than Nian, so he was one of the shortest in the class. Even so, this kid relied on his usual, outstanding performance to get the teacher to arrange him in the last row, near the trash can at the back door. From this, it could be seen how mischievous this kid was in the teacher's eyes. Li Sanduo was indeed very mischievous. However, his mischievousness was very different from other children. Perhaps it was because of his more antisocial personality. Li Sanduo didn't have many friends in class, so when he had nothing to do he would be alone in the last row, fiddling with something. Li Sanduo never played around with his classmates, nor did he like to bully others, but he had a very bad habit that the teacher disliked, and that was that he liked to interrupt during class. Just like a comedian, no matter what the teacher said on stage, he would always be the first to respond, and then make the whole class burst into laughter. In any case, he was a third-grade student, but he always pretended to be stupid in class, deliberately disrupting the class discipline, so the teacher naturally disliked him. They weren't afraid of students being mischievous, but they were afraid of students being unreasonable. Obviously, Li Sanduo belonged to the latter. It was unknown where this habit of his came from. After repeatedly failing to change, the teacher completely lost patience with him. One must know that this was the capital's affiliated primary school, and the teacher's shoulders carried a lot of pressure. The third grade was a very important turning point. Li Sanduo didn't like to study, but he actually wanted to affect others' studies. How could the teacher tolerate this? Therefore, the teacher simply moved him to the last row so that he wouldn't affect the other students. This was a warning. Li Sanduo didn't necessarily understand, but his parents definitely understood. If he continued to mess around like this, it wouldn't be a matter of changing seats, but a matter of persuading him to transfer schools. A weirdo like Li Sanduo wasn't very common. Although Nian didn't like him interrupting the teacher in class, that was another matter. Nian didn't hate him because of that. Therefore, after hearing Li Sanduo's words, Nian turned to look at him and then began to think seriously. Economy is a virtue. Wasn't there a famous quote hanging on the classroom wall? Anyway, it would be a waste to throw it away. If Li Sanduo wanted to eat it, then let him have it. All right. Thank you, class leader. Li Sanduo seemed to know who put the chocolate in Nian's drawer, so when he saw Nian nod in agreement, his face showed a very happy smile. Oh yeah. Now he would have chocolate to eat every day. The result was just as Li Sanduo had expected. For the next week, Nian would come to class every morning and find a piece of Ferrero chocolate in her drawer. Actually, she could have asked Big Cat to use its sense of smell to find this guy who had been secretly giving her gifts. However, considering that she didn't want to have any interaction with this person, Nian pretended that nothing had happened. After receiving the chocolate every day, she would give it to Li Sanduo as soon as possible. 3 yuan worth of Ferrero chocolate. He gave it to him for a week. This was King True Love. Under the nourishment of these love chocolates, Li Sanduo's complexion seemed to be a lot rosier than before. Even his thin and small figure showed signs of breaking out of the soil and growing at this moment. Li Sanduo was very grateful for Nian's generosity. Therefore, he now looked forward to tomorrow every day, hoping that he could eat such delicious chocolate tomorrow morning. But unfortunately, Li Sanduo's yearning for a happy life didn't last long before it completely came to an end. Early in the morning, after Nian came to class, she habitually looked down at her drawer as usual. Because she didn't see any chocolate, she couldn't help but be stunned. It couldn't be helped who asked her to develop a habit. Although she was a little surprised, Nian didn't take it to heart. It was better if no one disturbed her. Anyway, she would never fall in love with anyone early. Absolutely impossible. Without the chocolate, Nian naturally didn't need to deal with these things. Therefore, she subconsciously looked back, wanting to tell Li Sanduo that she didn't receive any chocolate today, so that Li Sanduo wouldn't have to wait there helplessly. However, after Nian turned back, she suddenly realized. Li Sanduo was like a frosted eggplant today, hugging his head and curling up in his seat. Looking from afar, he gave off a delicate and pitiful feeling. According to Li Sanduo's casual personality, even if he was scolded by the teacher, the expression on his face wouldn't change at all. Why did he seem like a different person today? Nian felt that it was a little strange. Out of concern for her classmate, after she put away her bag, she went straight to Li Sanduo's side. Li Sanduo, what's wrong with you? Hearing this, Li Sanduo buried his head on the table and didn't move at all. Nian couldn't help but worry, so she reached out and gently pushed him twice. Are you sick? Do you want me to help you apply for leave? Under Nian's constant questioning, Li Sanduo finally sat up from the table. However, he didn't immediately raise his head. Instead, it was as if someone had discovered a shameful secret. He impatiently waved his hand and said, I'm fine, don't bother me. What's wrong with you? Nian Yan felt that his reaction was very strange, so she couldn't help but bend down so that her eyes were level with Lisanduo's head. Then she saw the expression on his face. Lisanduo seemed to be crying. Nian Yan's eyesight was very good, so she immediately saw something strange on Lisanduo's face. Lisanduo's right cheek was a little red, and she could faintly see that it was a slap mark, plus the tear stains at the corner of his eyes. Looking at this situation, it seemed like he was bullied. This was bad. The little guy exploded on the spot. You're crying. Who bullied you? Tell me. I'll tell the teacher. Not to mention that she was now the class monitor. Even if she didn't have any position, Nian Yan would never allow bullying in her class. Because her father once said, "We must firmly say no to bullying in school." Seeing that Lisanduo was like a coward who only knew how to lie on the table and cry, Nian Yan was suddenly a little angry. Thus she grabbed Lisanduo's arm, pulled him up from his seat and shouted angrily, "Lisanduo, stand up. Tell me who bullied you. I'll help you." Chapter 522. Although Nian Yan didn't understand the specific meaning of the 8 words, eliminate evil and defend justice for the time being, this didn't stop her from having a warm-hearted heart that loved to fight for justice. Just like what her father usually taught her, regardless of status, background, knowledge, or upbringing, people need to respect each other. It was obvious that bullying others was a form of disrespect. Regardless of whether it was her or others who were bullied, Nian Yan would never allow such things to happen around her. Therefore, after confirming that Lisanduo was bullied, Nian Yan immediately took out her position as the class monitor and fiercely wanted to fight for justice for Lisanduo. Tell me who bullied you. Perhaps because she was angry, Nian Yan's words were powerful and resonating. Her voice was very loud and instantly attracted the attention of the other students. In a moment, Lisanduo, who was forcefully dragged out of his seat by Nian Yan, became the focus of everyone's attention. According to Lisanduo's personality, he definitely wouldn't care about how others looked at him. In fact, he might even be proud of himself. But Lisanduo didn't know what was wrong with him today, but when he realized that the other students were looking at him, his face suddenly flushed red. Following that, he shouted at Nian Yan with an agitated face, "It's none of your business. Go away." As he said that, he struggled with all his might as if he wanted to break free from Nian Yan's grip. Seeing Lisanduo's extreme reaction, Nian Yan could only resentfully withdraw her hand. Lisanduo. Nian Yan originally wanted to persuade him, but this Lisanduo seemed to have eaten gunpowder. Not only did he not accept Nian Yan's concern, he even straightened his neck and shouted at her, "Go away. It's none of your business. What does it have to do with you?" Oi. Since he had already said that, Nian Yan naturally couldn't say anything more. She could only helplessly turn around and return to her seat. What did it mean to grieve for misfortune and be angry for failure to fight? That was it. Compared to high school, school bullying was actually more common in elementary and middle school. The so-called school bullying was actually bullying other students through beating, insulting, and mocking. There were 2 types of people who were the easiest to bully. One type was introverted and cowardly. Even if they were bullied, they would endure it out of fear and thus be bullied for a long time. The other type was those who were flamboyant and liked to show off their uniqueness. Children with this type of character wouldn't care about other people's feelings and would easily attract the attention of the bullies. Lisanduo obviously belonged to this type of bully. What was important to note here was that bullies were usually members of a small group. Therefore, once there was bullying, it was usually a group of people who committed the crime together. Lisanduo's personality seemed casual and undisciplined. He would make the teacher angry in class whenever he had nothing to do. In fact, it was clear that he was a rather proud and solitary person. It was difficult for people like him to make friends. Thus, he could only use all kinds of outrageous behavior to gain more attention and cover up the loneliness in his heart. It was also because of this that Lisanduo would rather suffer silently than show his weak side in front of others. He didn't need anyone's help. Whether it was his parents, teachers, or classmates, the only one who could help him was himself. Thus, even if he was bullied today, Lisanduo didn't need any help. Because he wouldn't easily bow down and admit defeat. Nian Yan couldn't figure out these complicated problems at the moment. Thus, her thoughts at the moment were very simple. That was, to help Lisanduo get rid of the bullies. To achieve this goal, Nian Yan purposely observed Lisanduo for a long time today. However, throughout the day, Li Sanduo didn't show any signs of abnormality. During class he would still interrupt the teacher's lecture. After class he would quietly sit in his seat. During this period he didn't interact with anyone. Thus Nian couldn't tell who was bullying him. Without catching the culprit, Nian couldn't help even if she wanted to. Thus she could only watch from the side. It wasn't easy to wait until school was over, but Li Sanduo ran away with his school bag. This made Nian, who wanted to know more about the case, feel a little depressed. She had no choice but to complain to her father. As usual, Xianxia arrived at the school gate on time. When Nian came to his side, Xianxia picked her up from the ground. "Hey, what happened? Who made our little princess angry?" Since yesterday when he learned that the little girl had begun to experience puppy love, Xianxia increased her security level. Thus, even if he was in the courtyard he could check on the little girl's situation through the big cat. Thus, even without Nian saying anything, Xianxia already knew what she had experienced today. The little girl couldn't figure out Li Sanduo's behavior, so she immediately told Xianxia the whole story. Seeing that the little girl was so warm-hearted, Xianxia naturally had to encourage her. Thus, after thinking for a while he directly pointed out the key point. "Nian, since Li Sanduo was already crying on the table when you saw him, that means he must have been bullied before you came to school. So if you want to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, you just have to wake up earlier in the future and be the first to go to class." Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. What Daddy said made sense. No wonder she couldn't find the culprit. No matter how hard she tried, they committed the crime in the morning. Then I have to wake up earlier tomorrow. Daddy, remember to call me. I want to protect Li Sanduo. I can't let him be bullied by others. Seeing the little girl's indignant look, Xianxia couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. To Xianxia, the importance of this matter might not be as important as the supermarket discount. But to the little girl, this was an important matter that was enough to establish her values. Thus, not only did Xianxia not interfere, but he also followed the little girl's request and waited until dawn the next day to pull her out of bed. "Wake up, my little hero. There are still people waiting for you to save them." The little girl was still a little dazed at first. After hearing Xianxia's words, she immediately turned over and jumped out of bed as if she had been injected with chicken blood. "Daddy, let's go." How could the great Supreme Chen's daughter be the kind of person with bad values? Born between heaven and earth, she naturally had to be a chivalrous person and uphold justice. Chapter 523. With a firm resolve to uphold justice, the little fellow woke up early in the morning, which was a rare occurrence. When the father and daughter took a taxi to school, they arrived almost an hour earlier than usual. The capital-affiliated elementary school did not have a boarding school. Even though it was still early in the morning, the school gate was already bustling with activity. As a parent, Xianxia naturally could not instigate Nian to fight. Regardless of whether he could win or not, fighting was definitely wrong. Thus, when he saw the little girl's excited face, Xianxia smiled and reminded her. However, it was just a reminder. From the beginning to the end, Xianxia had no intention of interfering in this matter. As long as Nian's starting point was correct, no matter what she wanted to do as a father, he would support her with both hands and feet. School bullying, in fact, was just school violence. Many children were weak and did not dare to tell their teachers and parents even if they were bullied. Thus, once bullying occurred, it would usually last for a long time. Those who had not experienced such an incident would find it difficult to understand the despair and helplessness of the victims. Fear, helplessness, and panic. It was like a nightmare that pressured them to the point of suffocation, but the teachers and parents did not notice at all. They did not even dare to look at the bully. As long as the bully appeared in front of them, they would lower their heads and become silent dogs that only knew how to wag their tails and beg for mercy. This kind of thing was unavoidable. It was like a steel wire that was tied up and gradually tightened around the victim's heart. They were in pain, but they could not make a sound. Lu Sun once said, "If you do not explode in silence, you will perish in silence." There was a limit to everything. If Nian was willing to stand up and stop it, Xianxia would not let her stand aside and be a bystander. "Dad, don't worry. I won't fight with them. I just want to stop them from bullying Li Sanduo." Adhering to the responsibility and awareness of being the class leader, the little girl waved goodbye to Xianxia in high spirits, and then ran with big strides towards the teaching building. In the future she would be the first to reach the classroom. Nianyan's classroom was on the third floor. When she rushed to the classroom, there were already 2 or 3 students sitting in the classroom. She glanced at the back of the classroom and saw that Li Sandua was not there yet. Thus, she returned to her seat and habitually looked at her drawer. Fortunately, there was no chocolate. It was still early and even the teacher hadn't arrived at school yet, so after waiting for a while, Nian temporarily put these distracting thoughts behind her. She took out the textbook and began to review it seriously. In fact, she was not sure if Li Sandua would be bullied today. However, it was best if it did not happen. The only thing she could do was to stand up and stop the bullying as soon as it happened again. Nian was to study. As time passed, there were more and more people in the classroom. Perhaps it was because Nian had come too early today, so the children who usually liked to chase and play at the back of the classroom didn't make a fuss today for the first time. Instead, they sat obediently in their seats as soon as they entered the classroom. Taking advantage of the fact that class had not started yet, many students started to chat in low voices. But at this moment, a piercing cat's cry suddenly came from outside the window. Meow. Meow meow meow. After hearing this familiar voice, Nian immediately looked out the window. She saw the big cat lying on a tree branch and staring at the little girl with its faintly glowing eyes. When Nian noticed it, the big cat gently wagged its tail and quietly jumped to another tree branch. Nian understood what it meant. So without thinking, she stood up and quickly ran out of the classroom. The big cat moved around the tree while Nian chased after it in the corridor. When she ran into a classroom in the corner, the big cat finally stopped. Meow. There was a situation here. Nian looked up at the door sign and realized that she was in the music classroom. The door of the classroom was tightly shut. Nian subconsciously pressed her ear against the door and listened. She immediately heard some movement from within. There was someone inside. The big cat never did anything meaningless. Since it spoke, it meant that something must have happened. Hence, Nian didn't think too much about it and tried to twist the doorknob. The door was not locked. Nian pushed the door open and went in. At this moment, she suddenly realized. In this half-empty music classroom, there were 6 or 7 people standing there. Seeing this, Nian could not help but be stunned. She glanced at the people in front of her and saw a familiar figure. She could not help but ask, Li Sandua? Why are you here? There were 7 people in the classroom. Li Sandua was alone in the corner of the back door. The other 6 people were in a semicircle surrounding him. Nian's sudden appearance seemed to have frightened these mischievous bullies. Hence, when they heard her voice, the children who were originally facing away from her all turned to look at her in unison. The situation was awkward. Nian and these people stared at each other. After a few seconds of silence, one of the people who seemed to be the leader reacted. He quickly whispered to his companions, "Let's go." This person was tall and muscular. He looked like he was at least a 6th grade student. Perhaps it was because he was older, but to Nian this guy looked ferocious. He was stunned on the spot. There were no instruments in the music classroom, so the door was not locked. The leader of the group had a high reputation. After he gave the order, the other children followed behind him and walked out of the back door. However, just as they were about to leave, Nian clearly saw. The leader of the group suddenly kicked Li Sandua's inner side, causing Li Sandua's body to sway. If not for the wall supporting him, he would have fallen to the ground. At this moment, Nian finally regained her senses. So, Li Sandua was bullied by these people? She looked at Li Sandua, who was curled up in the corner, and then looked at the group of people who were swaggering towards her. At that moment, driven by a sense of justice, Nian rushed to the corridor and opened her arms to block the group of people. "Stop. You're not allowed to leave. Someone said that I should observe children more, so I'm very confused. Haven't you experienced these situations before? Have you forgotten? Why can I remember what I did in elementary school so clearly? I don't need to observe because I'm writing about myself. Is there a problem? Maybe it's because I've been living in the dormitory since the first year, so I've seen more things than you guys. Tell me a story that's hard to talk about. I once saw 2 boys hiding in the toilet and fighting with bayonets. My God, I was shocked at the time. This scene cast a huge shadow on my young heart. I probably won't be able to forget it for the rest of my life." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 524. The teaching building of the capital affiliated primary school was an outer corridor. Nian Nian was blocking the front door, so she blocked the only way out for this group of people. Although she was only a little more than 1.2 meters tall, when she bravely stood in front of the crowd, her small figure suddenly seemed infinitely taller. Don't leave. You have to apologize to Li San Duo. Or I'll tell the teacher. Tell him you bullied him. Nian Nian took out her trump card. For the lower grade students, the class leader's report was naturally quite lethal. However, to these senior school tyrants in front of them, how could such a weak threat be able to scare them? To put it bluntly, even if the teacher came today, they would at most be frightened for a while, then they would quickly calm down. Anyway, the teacher couldn't punish them physically. In the end, the only method that could be used was to call the parents. But if calling the parents was useful, how could they develop such a bad habit of doing things unscrupulously and without respect for others? Therefore, this was a paradox in itself. The fundamental reason why school bullying did not stop and even had a tendency to become more and more intense was the fundamental reason why school bullying did not stop. After all, the teachers did not have clairvoyant eyes and ears, so before they had absolutely strong evidence, the teachers could only use verbal warnings to prevent bullying from happening again. But it was a pity. Some people were born bad. With Wuxia's current education system, unless the situation was out of control, the teachers would never easily expel or dissuade a student. And this also meant that once the victim chose to endure, the bullying would continue until he graduated or transferred schools. Years of bullying and oppression to a child whose mind was not yet fully developed, what kind of cruel torture would that be? There was no junior high school in the capital, so the 6th grade students were the most powerful existence in the school. Therefore, when facing a 3rd grade girl like Nian Nian, the leading child did not take her threat seriously. Children at this age already knew the difference between boys and girls, so he did not deliberately make things difficult for Nian Nian. Instead, he said impatiently, "Go away." The group of people did not stop walking. Soon they arrived in front of Nian Nian. Nian Nian tried to reach out and stop him, but he pushed her aside with his long arms and legs. Things were getting out of hand. Before Nian Nian could react, the big cat, who had been observing the situation from the tree, was the first to explode. Meow. As if someone had stepped on its tail, the big cat let out a fierce howl and crouched on the tree trunk ready to pounce. But just as it was about to pounce, the big cat seemed to have received some sort of command, and its body suddenly froze in place. Both of its ears trembled slightly, and its tensed body immediately relaxed. Then it returned to its soft and feeble state. Meow. The big cat obediently laid back down as if nothing had happened. The children had no idea that they had just walked through the gates of hell. Because of the seal in her body, even though Nian Nian had already started cultivating, the strength of her body did not change much. Therefore, after being pushed hard by the leader of the children, Nian Nian immediately staggered and leaned against the railing of the corridor. From the beginning to the end, the leader of the children did not take her seriously. But he did not expect. After being pushed away, Nian Nian immediately went forward and grabbed his arm, then shouted angrily, "You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave." This completely angered the other party. After all, he was a 6th grade student. Facing Nian Nian, who had skipped a grade to become a 3rd grade, he naturally had an absolute advantage in terms of physical strength. So he immediately grabbed Nian Nian's wrist and used all his strength to twist her fingers. "Let go. Believe it or not, I'll beat you up. Get out of my way." An absurd farce was suddenly staged. Nian Nian held on tightly to the person's arm, and the leader of the children struggled with all his might. After a few seconds of entanglement, the other party suddenly lost his patience. So he no longer cared about gender differences and raised his leg to kick Nian Nian. Seeing this, the big cat could only helplessly close its eyes. It had no choice. Xianxia did not allow it to interfere. Bang! The big cat did not stop him, and Nian Nian's calf suffered a heavy kick. This was great. Nian Nian was completely angered by the other party's actions. "Do you still remember what Daddy said? We don't bully others, but we definitely can't let others bully us." So, she immediately copied the other party, raised her right leg and without a word kicked over. Moreover, her kick was even more ruthless and decisive than the other party's. After being kicked by her, the expression on the leader's face was very interesting. "You still dare to fight back? Brothers, beat her up for me." The other children had some reservations, but after seeing that Nian Nian dared to fight back, they swarmed over. They wanted to gang up on Nian Nian. just like when they ganged up on others in the past. Meow. The big cat could not bear to watch any longer. But just as it stood up again and was about to jump over to interfere, a thin figure suddenly rushed out from the front door. Crack. A crisp sound was heard and everyone, including Yin, could not help but turn to look. It was Li San Duo. After seeing that Yin was being ganged up on, this kid suddenly had the courage to pick up a plastic broom and hit the back of one of the children who was standing there. After the child who was beaten felt the pain, he immediately let out a blood-curdling scream. Then, as if he had gone crazy, he turned around and rushed towards Li San Duo. Then he violently pressed Li San Duo against the wall and started beating him up with all his might. After all, Yin was a girl, so when facing her, these children might not be able to do it. But if they wanted to hit Li San Duo, these children would be more ruthless than the other. So, they immediately turned their muzzles and rushed towards Li San Duo. Seeing this, Li San Duo changed his usual cowardly image. Not only did he withstand the punches and kicks of everyone, but he also fought back with all his might. A huge battle suddenly broke out just like that. After hearing the sounds of fighting in the corridor, the children who were originally sitting in the classroom rushed out one after another. There's a fight. There's a fight. Look, there's a fight over there. Go and tell the teacher. Chapter 525. Kids always like to join in the fun. Therefore, as soon as the fight started in the music room, the entire teaching building was in an uproar. Students from every class swarmed into the hallway to watch the fight. Some busybodies even put on a look of wanting to see the world in chaos, and actually clapped and cheered excitedly. There was still about half an hour before the morning reading time, so most of the teachers were already in the office, eating breakfast and chatting. Look, there are kids fighting outside. One of the teachers heard the commotion outside and immediately went to the window to take a look. What he saw was a big deal. The teacher was so scared that he threw away the soy milk and bread in his hand, and then rushed out of the office in a hurry. One must know that this was a primary school in the capital. Once a fight broke out, not only would the school punish the child involved, but they would also hold the teacher responsible for the child's class. Including Yin, there were not only 2 kids pushing and pulling each other in the hallway, but as many as 7 or 8. Therefore, the nature of this matter had escalated to the level of a gang fight, which was why it caused such a big commotion. They were in a gang fight. Everyone stop. What are you doing? The first to arrive at the scene was a PE teacher. Primary school PE teachers were very different from middle school PE teachers. Because he often taught the children broadcast gymnastics, the teacher recognized the leading child at a glance. Li Hu, stop it. Li Hu and his brothers were squeezing Li San Duo into a corner, so they did not notice the PE teacher's appearance at all. At this time, Yin, who had been standing at the back, saw the teacher's arrival. One had to admit that this little thing was quite clever. After seeing the PE teacher appear, she immediately took a few steps back, then pointed at the group of people in front of her and said righteously, "Teacher. They're bullying Li San Duo. I'm helping him." Until now, the children still did not notice the PE teacher's appearance. All of you stop. Seeing this, the PE teacher could not help but be a little angry. After a violent shout, he directly reached out and grabbed one of the children's ears, then pulled the child out of the crowd. Stand still. Don't move. If you dare to move again, I'll slap you. The physical education teacher also had a bad temper. He was not polite to these naughty kids at all. Under his tugging and kicking interference, Li Hu and the others immediately retreated to the side like mice seeing a cat, hanging their heads and not daring to move. Li San Duo was thin and small to begin with. In addition, Li Hu and the others were mostly 6th graders, so the PE teacher could tell who was the victim at a glance. Which class are you from? Are you okay? As he spoke, the teacher pulled Li San Duo to his side and helped him pat off the footprints on his body. Even though primary school students were a little reckless when fighting, they weren't very strong, so Li San Duo didn't have any serious external injuries. But even so, Li San Duo's face was suffused with a strange layer of redness. She reckoned that it wouldn't be long before this child turned into a swollen pig head with bruises all over his face. With the timely intervention of the PE teacher, this farce finally came to an end. Then all the participants of the fight, including Yin, were brought to the principal's office by the teacher. Tell me, why did you fight? The nature of today's incident was too bad, so it could only be handled by the principal himself. At this time, Li Hu and the others finally realized what they had done today. Therefore, after hearing the principal's question, the few children were like frosted eggplants, not daring to even breathe loudly. Peter, let me tell you. The little girl came to the principal's office as a witness of this incident. She was a girl, plus she was young and her usual performance was very good, so when the PE teacher saw Nian, he thought of her as a good student, a good class monitor who came to stop the fight. This was the natural advantage of being a top student. No matter how Li Hu defended himself, the principal would not listen to his explanation. Instead, he thought that this naughty kid was hopeless. Therefore, Nian, with the principal's intention to side with her, confidently told the whole story. Of course, she was telling the story from her own perspective. From her point of view, Li Sanduo was an innocent victim. After being targeted by Li Hu and the others for no reason, Li Sanduo could only silently endure Li Hu and the others' bullying. Therefore, no matter how the principal pursued the matter in the end, it should not be Li Sanduo's fault. Li Sanduo was innocent. After hearing Nian forcefully defend Li Sanduo, Li Hu and the others were a little unhappy. They saw Li Hu used his body to lightly bump the child beside him. Then the child seemed to have been provoked by something and could not help but explain with a red face. "It's not like that. Li Sanduo stole my chocolate. I asked him to return it to me. He didn't give it to me. That's why we hit him." In the end, the child seemed to have realized that hitting people was wrong, so his voice suddenly became low. Seeing this, the principal did not immediately speak. Instead, he looked thoughtfully at Nian. The principal originally wanted to use the confrontation between the two sides to clarify the entire matter so that he could give an absolutely fair punishment. Who would have thought? After being glanced at by the principal, Nian said very honestly, "I gave the chocolate to Li Sanduo." After saying this, Nian was still a little afraid that the principal would not believe her, so she told him about the love letter and chocolate that she received previously. Now this was great. After hearing Nian's story, the child's little face flushed red all the way to his ears. He was so embarrassed that he did not even dare to raise his head. "What's your name?" The principal was not asking Nian, but the unlucky one who had a crush on her. My name is Zhou Xian. Which class are you from?" "Third year, class 1. At that moment, the principal suddenly understood the entire situation. Thus, after waving his hand to let Nian and Li Sanduo leave first, the principal turned his head to look at Zhou Xian calmly and said, "Zhou Xian, right? Come here for a moment. There's a phone here. Do you know your parents' phone number? Come give them a call." After hearing the principal's words, the child named Zhou Xian immediately burst into tears. It was obvious that this child knew what it meant to call his parents. However, all of this had nothing to do with Nian anymore. Li Sanduo and Nian walked out of the principal's office side by side. At this time, class had already started, so the entire school returned to its usual tranquility. The two of them were silent. Li Sanduo suddenly thought of something, then he said to Nian with a serious face, "Thank you." This time, Li Sanduo did not call Nian class monitor in a sarcastic manner. Instead, he called her name seriously. Chinyan. Chapter 526. After writing, deleting and writing, he was still not satisfied. He really couldn't afford to do it now. Sleep, I'll fight again tomorrow. I can't finish writing returning from cultivation to become a stay-at-home dad. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 527. In the face of school bullying, silence was not a good solution. Silence was a disguised form of retreat. So instead of hoping that the bad guys would be kind and show mercy, it was better to tell them with the most firm attitude, "We're not that easy to bully. Maybe I can't beat you, but I'm definitely not afraid of you. If you kick me, I'll return the favor with a punch. As long as I don't fall, I'll never bow down to evil." Li Sanduo really experienced this feeling today. Although he had been beaten up so badly that he was limping a little, he was still able to walk. But at least at this moment, Li Sanduo was still in a very good mood. It had to be said, it felt good to use his fists to win respect for himself. Recalling the bravery he displayed at the critical moment, Li Sanduo suddenly felt as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He walked with vigor. "Class monitor, don't worry. If they dare to cause trouble in the future, I'll never be afraid of them again. So what if they have more people? I'll punch them until they cry. Like all boys, Li Sanduo's performance before and after the incident was like a different person. He kept bragging about his brave performance just now. But after Nian Nian heard it, she kept her head down and didn't say a word. It was not good to show off without support. So Li Sanduo couldn't help but poke Nian Nian, then asked with a puzzled face, "Class monitor, what's wrong with you?" Nian Nian glanced at him but still ignored him. Instead she frowned slightly and muttered to herself, No, Auntie didn't teach me that. When Li Hu kicked me I should have used my knee to block his foot, then raised my elbow to hit his chin. That way he would have instantly lost his ability to fight." As he spoke, the little guy even began to mimic the movements of his hands. Qin Xueqing taught her some basic martial arts moves, but she was still young so she couldn't understand the subtleties. Therefore, after everything had been settled, she finally remembered the moves that Qin Xueqing had taught her. Nian Nian gestured as if there was no one around. After seeing this scene, Li Sanduo's expression was very interesting. That's right. Wasn't the main culprit who started this war the class leader who always acted like a good student in front of him? If it wasn't for the class monitor, would Li Sanduo be able to walk out of the principal's office unscathed today? Thinking of this, Li Sanduo didn't dare to say another word. As the two of them returned to the classroom under the watchful eyes of the entire class, the farce finally came to an end. After Li Hu and his group were severely warned by the principal, they were completely dispirited. After that, not only did Li Sanduo never see them again, but even Nian Nian's drawer didn't have chocolate anymore. Now that he thought about it, Nian Nian seemed to have suffered a loss. Life returned to its usual tranquility. The weather in Shangjing gradually became hot. The tea house welcomed the peak season again, but unfortunately, its owner was no longer in the mood to run it. Because of this, Gu Lao had to make a special trip to the Sai courtyard to drink tea with Xianxia under the old locust tree. The two played chess and chatted. Their days were particularly comfortable. The life of a retired veteran was probably like this. Early in the morning, Xianxia sent Nian Nian to school. Not long after returning to the courtyard, there was a rush of knocking outside the courtyard. He thought that Gu Lao was here to drink tea again, so he opened the door with a smile on his face. But what Xianxia didn't expect was, when he opened the door, it wasn't Gu Lao who appeared in front of him, but a man and a woman. Xianxia knew these two people. The man was called Xiao Wang and the woman was called Xiao Lu. The two belonged to the Wu Lian inspection office and were responsible for monitoring him. The year before last, at the request of Qin Yongwang, they delivered a car to his family. What's the matter? Xianxia wasn't a voyeur, so under normal circumstances he didn't release his divine sense to pay attention to the situation around him. After all, he lived in the capital of the country and in the most central part of the city. Naturally, he didn't have to worry too much about safety. Anyway, as long as no one broke into the courtyard, Xianxia didn't care. "Mr. Chen, it's like this." Seeing that Xianxia's attitude was still mild, the young man called Xiao Wang hesitated for a moment before he said, "We just received an emergency report that someone may cause trouble on Chang'an Street tomorrow. Hohai is not far from Chang'an Street. The leader is worried that if there is an accident it may affect you, so he asked us to inform you in advance so that you can prepare in advance." After hearing what Xiao Wang said, Xianxia was instantly amused. Wang Chuanju's arrangement was a bit interesting. What was Chang'an Street? The first street of Wuxia. Not only was there the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square on this street, but there was also Zongnanhai and the Great Hall of the People. Who would dare to cause trouble in such a place? They must have eaten too much, right? Xianxia subconsciously felt that this matter was a bit ridiculous. After he pondered for a moment, he suddenly realized the deeper meaning of it. It turned out that Wang Chuanju was giving him a heads up. Since Wu Lian had already sent someone to inform him, it meant that this matter wasn't groundless. Something big was going to happen tomorrow. After all, things were not the same as before. Now that the internet was so advanced, once something happened on Chang'an Street, it would spread throughout the country and even the world in an instant. How embarrassing would that be? It would be embarrassing for the whole country. It was said that the security at the entrance of the Forbidden City was very strong, but had there been any lack of incidents on Chang'an Street over the years? For example, the Jinshui Bridge incident, the Founding Gate incident, the self-immolation incident. It would be embarrassing to pick out any one of them. Why did Wang Chuanju specifically send someone to inform him? It was to prevent the situation from getting out of control, so she wanted Xianxia to act as insurance. What was prevention? That was to nip all the criminals in the bud before they started their illegal activities. Could it be that they had to wait for the other party to blow up Chong and Street and directly commit a crime before they could arrest them? What a joke. Nothing must happen on Chong and Street. Therefore Wu Lian had to catch them all in one fell swoop before they took action. Although Xianxia made it clear that he wouldn't help Wu Lian do anything, this happened in front of his house. Could he just sit by and do nothing? If the troublemakers were forced to do something desperate by Wu Lian and did something shocking, they would naturally need Xianxia's help to resolve all of this in time to avoid causing panic among the people. There was nothing wrong with Wang Chuanju's arrangement. However, what made Xianxia feel slightly strange was, who exactly was the troublemakers tomorrow? Who would make Wu Lian put on such a big show and even need him to act as the last safety guarantee? Chapter 528. Xianxia was very curious about what would happen tomorrow, so he asked Xiao Wang in detail. But no matter how he probed, Xiao Wang refused to reveal any details. He didn't know if he really didn't have enough authority, or Wang Chuanju deliberately told him not to say anything. In short, no matter what the truth was, Xianxia's curiosity was successfully aroused by Xiao Wang. It was said that within 10 years Wuxia would have a total of 96 new types of frigates, including aircraft carriers, and officially enter the naval establishment. Under such circumstances, there were still people who dared to make trouble on Chong and Street. It had to be said that they were really courageous. As an outstanding young man of the new era who grew up singing, "I love Beijing's Tiananmen Square. The sun rises on Tiananmen Square." As long as Xianxia thought about what might happen tomorrow on Chang'an Street, he really wanted to immediately move a small stool to the front row to occupy a good seat. This was a very pure family plot, and it had nothing to do with personal experience. As long as one was not born rebellious, one would have a special feeling for the homeland that raised them. Homeland, homeland, homeland. That was the meaning. Of course, with Xianxia's current cultivation, he could basically be regarded as a god who lived on Earth. Gods would not intervene in the affairs of the mortal world, but they would always pay attention to every move in the mortal world. And this kind of behavior that clearly had the ability to intervene but chose to stay out of it to watch the fun was often said to be eating melons. Just like the little girl who watched the trailer of a certain animated movie, after watching the trailer she would naturally wait in front of the TV on time, only hoping that the movie was more exciting than the trailer. Xianxia was such a qualified melon eater now. Therefore, early the next morning after Xianxia sent Yan to school again, he directly released his divine sense. From Jiangguimen to Fuxing Gate in the west. With Tiananmen Square as the center, any movement within a radius of 10 kilometers was under his control. Xiao Wang did not lie to him. On this day the Forbidden City was still open to the public, but the security forces on Tiananmen Square were obviously more than usual. Could be said that there was a sentry every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. In addition to these guards on the surface, there were also many plainclothes people disguised as tourists wandering around the square. On the surface, everything was as usual, but secretly they were jittery and paranoid. It's a bit interesting, even snipers are here? Xianxia returned to the courtyard, but his attention was always on Chang'an Street. In addition to a few snipers hidden on the viewing platform, there were 3 buses with travel agency signboards parked not far from the flag stand. There were nearly 100 people in the 3 cars. All of them were warriors and most of them were at the level of transforming strength. In addition to these conventional arrangements, Xianxia also found that there was a celestial overseeing each of the 4 cardinal directions of the square. From this, it could be seen how much importance the Wu Lian attached to this impending big event. Because they did not know when the other party would take action, the guards on the square had to be in a state of high tension at all times so that they could control the troublemakers as soon as the incident happened and prevent the situation from escalating. In fact, since Qin Xueqing and the 300 deities of Daiyu Island were not present, it meant that the troublemakers could not pose a threat, so there was no need for the deities to suppress them. This was a contest between mortals. The reason why Wang Chuanju sent someone to inform Xianxia was mainly because Xianxia lived nearby. Once the situation changed and went out of the Wu Alliance's control, Xianxia would have to step in and resolve everything in time to prevent the innocent people from being alarmed. It had to be said that Wang Chuanju was very thoughtful. She did not even ask Xianxia for help, but she indirectly made Xianxia pay attention to this matter. As long as Xianxia paid attention to this matter, then everything else would be easy to deal with. It was not that Wang Chunju was so shrewd that she even wanted to scheme against Qinshi, but because this matter was too important. After all, Tiananmen Square was the face of Wuxia, so no accidents could happen. Once the operation began, the Wu Lian would catch all these criminals in one fell swoop. Wang Chunju's arrangement was very reliable. But what she did not expect was, after the Wu Lian had made all the preparations, there was still no sign of the troublemakers showing up. Qinshi sat on the rocking chair and waited from morning to afternoon. When the sun was about to set, the streets of Chong and were still as peaceful as ever. The warm sunlight sprinkled on one's body, and a long wait inevitably made one feel sleepy. Boss, didn't the higher-ups say that something would happen today? How come we haven't even seen a single shadow after waiting for so long? Wait slowly. Are you still hoping for something to happen? Let me tell you, it's best if nothing happens. Something does, you'll cry. In a police car next to the square, two men in police uniforms were holding binoculars and chatting idly. Their task today was very simple, which was to maintain order at the scene to avoid causing panic among the crowd. As basic police officers, the two of them did not know what would happen today, but this did not prevent them from speculating. Something big was going to happen today. Therefore, the two of them were like Qinshi now, and even somewhat hoped that the troublemakers would show up soon. What time is it now? Let me see. They could not bring their phones on duty, so one of them raised his wrist and looked at it, then replied, it's already 4:30 in the blink of an eye. 4:30? The Forbidden City is about to close. Just as the two of them were busy lamenting the passing of time, an extremely sharp whistle suddenly sounded not far away. Whoosh! Those who did not know would think that it was the red armband at the traffic light intersection directing traffic. But after the two of them heard it, they immediately jumped out of the car as if they had received some kind of order. Quick! Set up the cordon. The whistle was the secret signal for this operation. Since the whistle sounded, it meant that the troublemakers had shown up. Just as expected. Just as the police were busy setting up the cordon and sealing off the square, the martial artists on the 3 buses also rushed out of the cars. When was the Forbidden City the most crowded? It was when it opened in the morning and when it closed in the afternoon. Therefore, after the whistle sounded, all the Wulian action personnel went against the flow of people and swarmed toward Tiananmen. At the same time, a tour group of about 30 to 40 people walked out of the entrance of the scenic area under the guidance of the tour guide. It's them, take them down. Chapter 529. Although today was not a holiday, the scenic spot was still crowded with tourists from all over the country. According to the latest information received, there were about 30 to 40 troublemakers, and they disguised themselves as a tour group to blend in with the tourists. Therefore, as soon as the operation personnel received the news, they immediately locked on to the tour group that had just passed through the end gate and was slowly walking toward Tiananmen Square. All groups, listen up, you must take down this group of people as soon as possible. Remember, if you encounter resistance during the mission, you can kill them on the spot. Move. In an instant, countless operation personnel disguised as tourists gradually flocked toward the tour group from all directions. However, when the operation personnel really approached the tour group and saw the faces of the troublemakers in front of them, they suddenly felt a storm in their hearts. Many people were so scared that they quickly stopped and began to hesitate whether to continue to go forward and arrest them. Are these the troublemakers mentioned in the emergency report? Before seeing this tour group, everyone thought that the target of today's mission was some kind of vicious and crazy terrorist. Who would have thought? At this moment, what appeared in front of them was actually a tour group of elderly people. The elderly people wore the same clothes. They wore a small red vest with the travel agency logo on their upper bodies and a white baseball cap on their heads. Among them, the older ones had white hair, so the operation personnel estimated that these elderly people were at least 70 or 80 years old. Even the youngest among them was about 60 or 70 years old. If this tour group was placed on Chong and Street, it would probably be a superstar group of scammers. Who would dare to provoke such a team? Could it be Wu Lian's information was wrong? At that moment, not only were the operation personnel in charge of the arrest a little confused, but even the supervisor behind them was stunned. While everyone was hesitating, this elderly tour group acted as though nothing had happened and walked past the Tiananmen Gate Tower casually. Faster, thief. What the hell is your intelligence group doing? Come, I'll let you see with your own eyes. This is the F*King operation target you told me about. On the Tiananmen Square. The operations supervisor of this mission was communicating with the intelligence group in exasperation. These elderly people in front of him had trouble even walking. How could they be the troublemakers mentioned by the intelligence group? Isn't this nonsense? Don't worry, I'm checking the situation here, right? On the other end of the phone, the director of the intelligence group was also very anxious. How could such a big mistake be made? That's impossible. While the operation team and intelligence group repeatedly confirmed the target's information, the elderly tour group slowly walked out of the passage under the guidance of the tour guide and came directly under the president's statue. Soon after, a shocking scene occurred. After these old men walked out of the city gate tower's passageway, they neatly lined up in a 6x6 square formation as if they had rehearsed it beforehand. Then they all sat cross-legged on the ground. From the beginning to the end, these elderly people did not make a single sound. Wait, something happened. They're staging a sit-in. Unlike ordinary protesters, this super Pengxi group was small in number and their behavior was very strange. The tour guide was the only middle-aged man. After seeing his tour group doing such a shocking thing, he did not stand up to stop them. Instead, he directly walked past the crowd and stood in the first row of the group. The tour guide stood while the elderly people sat. When the passing tourists saw this scene, they could not help but stop and stand nearby and whisper to each other. What's going on? What's going on? Is something big going to happen? Where's the phone? Take a picture. As more and more people gathered in the square. After taking a deep breath, the tour guide faced the elderly people and slowly sat on the ground. Then, the middle-aged man dressed as a tour guide recited in front of everyone in the room, with a cadence of intonation, "This is the beginning of the end. Xian cultivator, the ancestor of nature, and the great sect of thousands of people. It's profound, so it's called subtle. It's continuous, so it's called wonderful. It's high, so it covers the 9 heavens, so it's wide, so it covers the 8 corners. It's as bright as the sun and the moon, so fast as lightning. It's as bright as a flash, or drifting like a stream of stars, or rippling like a deep pool, or flying like a cloud." This passage came from a Daoist classic. Naturally, ordinary people would not understand what he was saying. But for the members of the operation group, this passage was no less shocking than a sudden clap of thunder. It was inexplicably shocking. This is a cultivation technique? He's preaching? Quick, stop him. Hearing the manager's angry roar from the headset, the staff suddenly came back to their senses. Then they no longer cared about shocking the world. In front of all the tourists present, they directly pounced on the elderly tour group fiercely. However, just as one of the operation members was about to get close to the elderly people, an invisible force suddenly sent him flying and he fell heavily on the wall of the tower. Bang! With a muffled sound, the operation member, who was only at the mid-stage of concealing strength, fainted on the spot. At this time, the manager of the operation group suddenly realized that these elderly people, who seemed to be on the verge of death, had secretly set up a defensive array under the tower according to the arrangement of the 36 Big Dipper gods. Fu Xian Dao, obtain from the inside, guard from the outside, use from the spirit, forget from the weapon. This is the essence of Xian Dao. Obtain from the noble, do not wait for the power of the yellow axe. The body is rich, do not need the rare goods. Too high to be climbed, too deep to be fathomed. Riding on the flowing light, driving the flying scenery, penetrating the 6 void, penetrating the cold. Beyond the supreme, into the supreme. The tour guide sitting at the front did not seem to notice Wu Lian's sudden action at all. He still closed his eyes and continued to recite to himself. The onlookers did not know the truth. They only felt that this person's behavior was a little strange, so they used their mobile phones to record the entire process of him preaching. Back off, back off. Stop taking pictures. We are carrying out a special mission. Please cooperate with us. Thank you. After all, this incident happened under the Tower of Tiananmen. The operation members did not dare to forcibly break the array, so they could only temporarily drive the onlookers away from the scene. Hey, what are you doing? Why are you pushing me? Which department are you from? How would I know who you are without a uniform? I'm telling you, you better show some respect. I'm not leaving. What can you do about it? Come on, come hit me. Wu Lian wanted to clear the area, but the onlookers did not agree. The elderly tour group in front of them did not kill anyone and they did not set off any fire. What was wrong with them sitting there silently and watching from the side? Was it illegal to sit still? Was it illegal to watch from the side? Wang Chuanju had thought of everything but she did not expect. Chapter 530. Come here to shock the virtues, spread the teachings under the gate tower. In this day and age traffic could be converted into cash. As long as there were people watching online, there would naturally be money to be made. Therefore, as soon as this elderly tour group sat down, someone next to them picked up their phone and started filming the entire process. According to the Public Security Administration punishment law, this tour group's behavior had seriously disrupted the order of the square, so the square's security personnel had the right to expel them. The operation personnel wanted to forcibly take this elderly tour group away, but due to the fact that there were too many tourists around, they did not dare to make too much of a commotion. Since they could not force their way in, they could only set up a cordon and wait for backup. While the operation personnel were anxious, the middle-aged man dressed as a tour guide sat on the ground, turning a blind eye to everything that was happening around him. Even though Wu Lian's operation personnel had already stood in front of him and tried to dissuade him, he still ignored them. Instead, he continued to chant some kind of unknown scripture. The middle-aged man's voice was not loud, but everyone present could clearly hear the scripture he was chanting. This kind of behavior was a little strange no matter how one looked at it. It would definitely go viral on the internet. Therefore, many tourists directly picked up their phones and started filming the entire process, so this scene instantly spread all over the internet. Don't film. If you film again, I'll confiscate all their phones. Seeing that the situation was gradually getting out of control, the director in charge of this operation made a prompt decision and directly ordered the confiscation of everyone's phones. Some of the tourists were frightened and ran away on the spot. However, some tourists were very hot-tempered. Seeing that the operation personnel were about to confiscate their phones, not only did they not dodge, but they also pointed their cameras at the operation personnel and kept shouting, "Come, everyone, come and see, the security guards of Tiananmen Square are violently enforcing the law." For a moment, the situation was a little out of control. Just as Wu Lian was busy driving away the onlookers, the 4 celestial beings who had heard the news also arrived at the scene and directly launched a strong attack on the array formed by the elderly people. These elderly people seemed to have cultivation, but they had not been cultivating for long. Among them, the most powerful one had probably just touched the threshold of the chi refinement stage. Therefore, as soon as the 4 celestial beings launched an attack, the entire array suddenly shook. But at this moment, the tour guide suddenly stopped chanting. Then he slowly stood up from the ground and said to the people around him, "Everyone stop. I've done what I have to do. I'll go with you now." As soon as the middle-aged man finished speaking, the elders behind him all stood up from the ground and quickly walked to his side. From the looks of it, these old people in their 70s and 80s seemed to be following the lead of this middle-aged man. Seeing this, the operation personnel could not help but look at each other, as if they could not understand the actions of the person in front of them. "There are too many people here. Hurry up and take them away." After the middle-aged man surrendered, the supervisor quickly rushed down from the tower. For the sake of safety, the supervisor signaled for the operation personnel to handcuff all the old people in front of him. Regarding this, the middle-aged man in the lead seemed to be quite dissatisfied. Thus, he went directly to the supervisor and pleaded for these old people. "These old people have only been cultivating with me for a short period of time. Today they are only here to cheer for me. May I ask what crime they have committed? If you insist on denouncing them, then go ahead and take me back. This has nothing to do with them. Don't worry if I really want to cause trouble. Today I won't preach here and I won't surrender without a fight." Hearing this, the supervisor had no choice but to take a serious look at the person in front of him. To be honest, if he really had to forcibly take these old people away in front of all the tourists present, there might be some bizarre negative news on the internet tomorrow. And according to the information that Wu Lian had received before, the instigator of everything today seemed to be this middle-aged man in front of him. Therefore, after hearing the middle-aged man's words, the supervisor immediately walked to the side. After a short discussion with the higher-ups, the final decision was made. "Take this person back. The others go to the side and register in order. If there are no problems, let them go." The middle-aged man seemed to be very satisfied with this arrangement. Thus he turned around and whispered some instructions to the old people. Then he took the initiative to follow the supervisor into a bus not far away. Throughout the entire process, the old people present did not say a word. They all seemed to listen to the middle-aged man in front of them. Therefore, after the middle-aged man was taken away by Wu Lian, only a few old people could not suppress the sadness in their hearts and silently shed tears. On the bus, as usual, Wu Lian began to interrogate the middle-aged man. "What's your name? Where are you from? Do you know what you've done today?" Wu Lian had to treat this celestial being with caution. Therefore, once the man got on the bus, the operation personnel handcuffed him with special stainless steel handcuffs. "My Taoist name is Yujing. Since I was born in Wuxia, then I'm from Wuxia. Is that how you answer? Speak human language." The investigator was very dissatisfied with the middle-aged man's attitude, so he pretended to be fierce and slammed the table. Seeing this, the middle-aged man was not offended at all. Instead, he chuckled and said, "Looking at your arrangements today, it seems like you're afraid that I'll do something evil here? You gathered people to spread religion and tried to mislead people. Isn't that evil? Is that so?" Hearing this, the middle-aged man who called himself Yujingzi suddenly shook his head and laughed. "I'm just following the will of the heavens. I don't seek selfish desires. I'm only doing this for the common people. Now that the golden age is coming, the ancient path is flourishing. Since the Wu Lian is the weapon of the country, how can we just block and expel them and forcefully cut off the path of cultivation? As the saying goes, it's better to lead than to block. What's the difference between such a forceful and foolish method and the tyranny of ancient times?" Hearing Yujingzi's words, the investigator was amused. "You know about the Wu Lian too? I almost thought that you've become stupid from cultivating in the mountains." Haha. There was no point in saying anything more. The middle-aged man was a proud man. Seeing the investigator's bad attitude, he shook his head lightly, closed his eyes and said nothing more. After all, he had done what he had to do. Even if the Wu Lian wanted to punish him, he would not have any complaints in his heart. A single spark could start a prairie fire. As the forerunner, he was the first to light this fire. Now it was time to see when this fire would burn.